There's a particular phrase that lives in the mouth of almost everyone who has learned to wear their pain privately. 3 small words that slip out so automatically, so reflexively, that you might not even notice you're saying them anymore. I'm fine. You say it when someone asks how you are. You say it when the truth is too complicated to explain. You say it when you're drowning but don't want to make waves. You say it so often, so convincingly that people believe you. And maybe, in some small corner of your consciousness, you've started to believe it too. But your body knows differently. Your heart knows differently. Somewhere inside, beneath the performance, beneath the smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes, beneath the steady voice that doesn't waver, you know differently. Because you're not fine. You haven't been fine for a while now, but saying so feels impossible. Admitting it feels dangerous. So you keep performing, keep nodding, keep saying those 3 words that have become both your shield and your prison. If you've ever found yourself doing this, if you've ever walked through your days wearing a mask of okayness, while everything inside feels like it's barely holding together, you are not alone in this experience. Now dim those lights, get cozy, settle into your pillow, and let yourself relax. Take a breath. Tonight, we're going to explore this together. The psychology of acting fine when you're not, the weight of that performance, the reasons it exists, and what it costs to maintain it, gently, with compassion. Because there's so much more to understand about why we do this, and what it means to live behind a smile that no one questions. The moment someone asks, "How are you?" something happens so quickly, you barely register it's occurring. Your mouth opens, and the words emerge before your brain has even accessed the truth. I'm fine. I'm good. Can't complain. These phrases roll off your tongue with the smoothness of something rehearsed 10,000 times, which in a way they have been. There's no pause between the question and your answer. No space where you might actually check in with yourself, assess your genuine state, consider telling the truth. The response is automatic, mechanical, a social script your mouth knows how to perform without any input from your actual feelings. And in that automation, in that fraction of a second where your truth gets bypassed entirely, something important is happening. Something that reveals just how deeply you've learned to protect others from your reality. This automatic response exists in the realm of the unconscious. It's not that you're consciously choosing to lie when someone asks how you are. It's more like your brain has created a shortcut, a well-worn neural pathway that activates the moment the question is posed. The question comes in, and before it can travel to the part of you that actually knows how you are, before it can reach the place where your genuine feelings live, it gets intercepted, rerouted, and the automatic response mechanism takes over, producing the socially acceptable answer without ever consulting your actual emotional state. You can test this yourself if you pay attention. The next time someone asks how you are, try to notice what happens in that split second between hearing the question and answering it. Try to catch yourself in the act of bypassing your own truth. You'll probably find that by the time you've noticed anything at all, the words, "I'm fine," are already leaving your mouth. The automation is that fast, that efficient, that deeply ingrained. It's like a reflex. Touch a hot stove and your hand pulls back before you've consciously registered the heat. Someone asks how you are and "I'm fine" emerges before you've consciously registered your actual state. And there's a particular kind of efficiency to this automation that's worth understanding. Because it's not just about speed, it's about protection. Your psyche learned, probably years ago, that truthful answers to "how are you" often led to uncomfortable outcomes. So it developed this shortcut as a way of protecting you from those outcomes. It's like your mind is constantly running a background program that says, "Incoming question about emotional state. Initiate standard protective response. Bypass actual emotional assessment. Deliver socially acceptable answer. Maintain safety." All of this happens so fast you experience it as just answering a question. But really, you're executing a complex protective sequence that has become so automatic you don't even know you're doing it. And the phrases themselves, these particular combinations of words, they've been selected through years of trial and error. "I'm fine" works because it's brief enough not to invite follow-up questions. "I'm good" works because it sounds positive without being suspiciously enthusiastic. "Can't complain" works because it acknowledges difficulty might exist while simultaneously dismissing it as unworthy of discussion. Each phrase has been refined through use, tested in hundreds of interactions, proven effective at ending the inquiry before it can go deeper. You've become a master of the non-answer answer. the response that technically addresses the question while revealing absolutely nothing true. And what makes this particularly fascinating is how universal it is. Almost everyone does this to some degree, which means when you say you're fine and the other person accepts that answer without question, they're probably doing the same thing you're doing. They're probably not fine either. They're probably also performing, so you have two people, both not fine, both pretending to be fine, both accepting each other's pretense without question. It's a mutual agreement to stay on the surface, to keep things comfortable, to not burden each other with reality. And this agreement, this social contract of automatic fineness, it allows interaction to remain smooth, but it also ensures that almost no one is actually being honest about how they are. Almost no one is actually being seen. Fine is not a feeling, it's a structure, a carefully constructed facade that requires constant maintenance, constant attention, constant energy to uphold. When you say you're fine, what you're really doing is activating an entire system of self-management that runs beneath your conscious awareness. Your face arranges itself into neutral pleasantness. Your voice finds a tone that suggests calm. Your body language communicates ease. Your words stay surface level and uncomplicated. All of this happens simultaneously, orchestrated by a part of you that learned long ago how to perform okayness regardless of what's actually happening inside. And this architecture, this elaborate construction of fine, becomes so familiar that you stop noticing you're building it. It just appears, automatically, the moment you step into any space where your truth might be visible. Think of it like a building. From the outside, it looks solid, stable, complete. But if you could see the internal structure, you'd notice all the support beams, the reinforcements, the constant repairs happening behind the walls. Fine is like that. It looks simple from the outside. Just a word, just a state of being. But internally, maintaining fine requires an entire infrastructure of emotional management, cognitive control, and behavioral regulation. You're not just saying you're fine, you're constructing and maintaining an entire presentation of fineness that involves your face, your voice, your posture, your word choices, your energy, your attention. Every aspect of your external self gets coordinated to project this single message. Everything is okay here. And this construction happens in layers. The foundation is your facial expression. You've learned exactly what your face needs to look like to communicate fine. Not too happy, because that might seem fake. Not too neutral, because that might invite questions. Just the right amount of pleasantness. Just enough of a smile to suggest contentment without suggesting you're forcing it. Your eyes need to be clear, not clouded with the worry or sadness or exhaustion you might actually be feeling. Your brow needs to be smooth, not furrowed with the tension that's actually present. You've practiced this face so many times it appears automatically now, but make no mistake, it's a constructed expression. A mask you've learned to wear so convincingly that even you sometimes forget you're wearing it. On top of that foundation, you build the next layer, which is your vocal tone. The way you speak when you're performing fine is different from how you speak when you're actually at ease. There's a particular quality to the voice when it's managing presentation rather than expressing truth. It's slightly more controlled, slightly more modulated. The natural variations in pitch and rhythm that come from genuine feeling get smoothed out, regulated, kept within a narrow, acceptable range. You speak clearly, evenly, without the tremor that might reveal actual emotion, without the heaviness that might suggest actual exhaustion, without the edge that might hint at actual frustration. Your voice becomes a carefully tuned instrument, playing only the notes that communicate calm, capable, fine. Then there's the layer of body language, how you hold yourself, how you move through space. When you're performing fine, your body takes on particular characteristics. You might sit up straighter than you actually feel like sitting. You might move with more energy than you actually possess. You might keep your arms uncrossed, your posture open, your movements smooth and unhurried, even when everything inside you feels collapsed or agitated or exhausted beyond measure. You've learned what a fine person's body looks like, and you make your body conform to that image. It's like being a puppeteer for your own physical form, pulling the strings to create the right appearance regardless of what you're actually experiencing. And the final layer, perhaps the most crucial, is the content of what you share. When you're performing fine, you carefully curate what information crosses from your internal world to the external world. You talk about surface things, safe things, things that reveal nothing about your actual emotional state or your actual struggles, You might mention being busy, but you frame it as productive busyness rather than overwhelming busyness. You might acknowledge something challenging, but you immediately follow it with how you're handling it, how it's not that bad, how you've got it under control. Every piece of information you offer gets screened first, gets edited, gets shaped into something that maintains the architecture of fine rather than threatening to expose what fine is hiding. All of these layers work together, simultaneously, creating a presentation so seamless that most people never question it. And you've become so skilled at constructing this presentation that you can do it while simultaneously experiencing something completely different internally. Your face can look calm while your mind is racing with anxiety. Your voice can sound steady while your chest feels tight with held back tears. Your body can appear relaxed while your muscles are clenched with tension. Your words can suggest ease while your internal experience is absolute chaos. You exist in two states at once, the constructed external state of fine and the actual internal state of very much not fine. And the gap between these two states, that gap is where you live most of the time, in the space between what you are and what you appear to be. To understand why you learn to act fine when you're not, you have to go back to where the pattern began. And for most people, it begins in childhood. Not necessarily through dramatic trauma, though sometimes that's part of it. More often, it begins through subtle lessons, absorbed from the emotional climate of your early environment. Perhaps you learned it from a parent who always said they were fine even when they clearly weren't, modelling that this is simply what adults do. Or maybe you learned it by being the child whose distress made other people uncomfortable, whose crying was met with frustration rather than comfort, whose needs felt like burdens rather than valid requests for care. Children are remarkably perceptive. They notice when their emotions destabilise the adults around them, and when they notice this pattern repeatedly, they begin to make an adaptation. They learn to hide their not-fineness. They learn to manufacture fine when fine doesn't exist. Children don't have the cognitive sophistication to understand what's happening when they learn these lessons. They don't think to themselves, I see, my emotional expression creates problems for the adults in my life, therefore I should suppress it. The learning happens at a much more primitive level. It's almost cellular. A child cries and something in the environment shifts. The shift might be subtle. A parent's face hardens, a sigh of exasperation, a tone that suggests the crying is an inconvenience, or the shift might be more dramatic, anger, punishment, being sent away to cry alone. But whatever the shift is, the child registers it. Registers that their emotional expression changed something in the environment, and that change didn't feel safe or supportive, it felt dangerous. And so the child's nervous system, which is always oriented towards survival, begins to make an adaptation. It begins to suppress the expression, begins to learn that safety comes from appearing fine even when you're not. Sometimes the lesson comes not from negative responses, but from absence of response. A child who shares excitement or fear or sadness and receives nothing back. Not cruelty, just emptiness. A parent who's physically present but emotionally unavailable. A caregiver who's too overwhelmed with their own struggles to have capacity for the child's feelings. And the child learns, not through any explicit teaching but through experience, that expressing feelings doesn't lead to connection or comfort. It leads nowhere. So why express them? Better to keep them contained. Better to say you're fine even when you need something. Because needing things, expressing things, reaching out for emotional support, these actions don't produce the results they're supposed to produce. They don't bring the parent closer, they don't create safety, they just hang in the air unmet. And so the child adapts, learns to be fine, learns to need nothing from anyone. Other times the lesson is more explicit. Families where emotion is actively discouraged. Where crying is met with statements like, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." Where expressing fear is labelled as weakness. Where showing vulnerability is treated as something shameful, something to be corrected, something unacceptable. In these environments, the message is clear. Your feelings are not welcome here. Your emotional experience is not acceptable. The only acceptable state is fine. So the child learns to be fine, learns to construct the appearance of okayness regardless of what's actually happening inside. Because the alternative, being honest about not being fine, leads to consequences that feel worse than the pain of pretending. And sometimes children learn this pattern by watching the adults around them, by observing how the grown-ups handle emotion. If you grew up in a household where no one talked about feelings, where everyone maintained surfaces, where the operating principle was, we don't discuss those things, then you learned through observation that this is how life works. This is how people cope. You don't talk about what's hard. You don't admit when you're struggling. You just keep going. Keep maintaining appearances. Keep saying you're fine. It becomes normalized, becomes the only model you have for how to be a person in the world. And so when you grow up and someone asks how you are, you do what you watch the adults do. You say you're fine, because that's what you learned fineness looks like. A performance everyone maintains, a pretense everyone upholds, a lie everyone agrees to tell. The particular circumstances vary from person to person. The specific lessons, the exact moments when the pattern was established, the individual experiences that taught you to hide your not fineness, these are unique to your history. But the outcome is remarkably similar across different people, different families, different backgrounds. You learned, usually before you were old enough to consciously understand what you were learning, that expressing your actual emotional state is not safe. That being honest about struggle is not acceptable. That the right answer, the safe answer, the answer that keeps things manageable and keeps people comfortable, is always, I'm fine. And once that lesson gets learned at a young enough age, it becomes foundational. It becomes part of how you operate in the world. Not a choice you make in each moment, but a default setting that runs automatically. A pattern established so early and so deeply that by the time you're an adult you don't even remember learning it. It's just who you are. Someone who says they're fine even when they're not. The performance of being fine serves a purpose. This is crucial to understand. It's not arbitrary, not pointless, not something you do for no reason. The mask protects you. It keeps you safe in environments that might not be safe for your vulnerability. It prevents questions you don't want to answer. It shields you from the discomfort of other people's reactions to your struggles. It allows you to maintain control when everything inside feels chaotic. It preserves your privacy, your dignity, your sense of autonomy in a world that sometimes feels invasive, and perhaps most importantly, it protects others from having to deal with your pain. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that your struggles are burdensome, that your difficulties make others uncomfortable, that the kindest thing you can do is keep your not fineness to yourself. So you wear the mask. And it works. It keeps everything contained, everyone comfortable, yourself protected, until of course it doesn't. Think about what happens when you don't wear the mask, when you let the fineness slip and someone sees that you're actually struggling. Often their reaction confirms why you keep the mask in place. They get uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. They offer platitudes that don't help. They try to fix something that can't be fixed with simple solutions. They change the subject. They minimize what you're experiencing. They compare your struggle to something else and suggest yours isn't that significant. Or they take on your struggle as their own burden, becoming worried or distressed in ways that now require you to manage their emotions about your situation. Each of these reactions, in its own way, reinforces the wisdom of keeping the mask on. The mask protects you from all of this. From the discomfort, the unhelpful responses, the additional burden of managing other people's reactions to your struggles. And the mask also protects your sense of control. When you're struggling internally, when everything feels chaotic or overwhelming or barely manageable, maintaining the external appearance of fine gives you something to hold on to. It's like an anchor point. At least you can control how you appear, even if you can't control how you feel. At least you can manage your presentation, even if you can't manage your circumstances. There's a strange comfort in this, in knowing that no matter what's happening inside, you can still show up looking put together, sounding capable, appearing to have everything under control. It doesn't change what you're experiencing internally, but it gives you agency over something. It gives you mastery in at least one domain. And when you feel powerless over much of your life, having mastery over your presentation can feel essential, can feel like the one thing keeping you from completely falling apart. The mask also preserves your privacy, and privacy for many people feels sacred, feels necessary, feels like a boundary that must be maintained. Not everyone deserves access to your internal world. Not everyone has earned the right to know what you're going through, and the mask allows you to move through public spaces, social situations, work environments, without having to expose your private struggles to people who haven't earned that access. You can save your vulnerability for the few people you trust, if such people exist. Or you can keep it entirely to yourself, which might feel safer than sharing it with anyone. Either way, the mask gives you control over who sees what. It lets you decide what gets revealed and what stays hidden. And in a world that often feels like it's constantly demanding more from you, more access, more explanation, more transparency, having this boundary feels important. Feels like one thing you get to keep for yourself, and then there's the protection the mask offers to others. This might sound strange, but many people who act fine when they're not are doing so partly out of care for others. They genuinely believe that their struggles would burden people, that their difficulties would cause worry or distress or discomfort, that the kindest thing they can do is handle their problems privately, internally, without requiring anything from anyone else. This isn't entirely irrational. Most people are dealing with their own challenges. Most people have limited capacity for taking on others' struggles, and so keeping your not fineness to yourself can feel like a gift you're giving to others, like you're making their lives easier by not adding your struggles to whatever they're already carrying. It's a form of care, even if it's also a form of isolation. You're protecting them from having to worry about you, to feel helpless about your situation, to experience the discomfort of not knowing how to help. You're keeping everything manageable for them by keeping everything hidden from them. But here's what often goes unacknowledged about the mask. Yes, it serves all these protective functions. Yes, it has genuine utility. Yes, it makes certain things easier in the short term. But the mask also has costs. Costs that accumulate over time. Costs that might not be immediately visible but that are very real nonetheless. Because maintaining a performance day after day, interaction after interaction, year after year, that maintenance requires energy, requires a kind of constant vigilance, requires holding yourself in a particular way that doesn't match your actual experience, and that split, that gap between what you are and what you appear to be, that gap takes a toll that's hard to measure but impossible to ignore once you start paying attention to it. Maintaining the appearance of being fine when you're not requires energy, enormous amounts of energy that most people never see and you might not even consciously recognize you're expending. Because performance is work, emotional labor, the constant monitoring of your expression to make sure nothing slips through that shouldn't, the careful calibration of your tone to stay within acceptable ranges, the internal screening of every word before it leaves your mouth, checking whether it reveals too much, suggests too much need, implies too much struggle. This happens all day, every day, in every interaction. You're managing two realities simultaneously, the internal reality of what you're actually experiencing and the external reality of what you're allowing others to see. And the gap between these two realities, the space you have to maintain between truth and presentation, that gap takes work. Exhausting, invisible, relentless work that leaves you depleted in ways that have nothing to do with the actual challenges you're facing. Think about what it takes to monitor your facial expression continuously, to make sure your face is communicating what you want it to communicate rather than what you're actually feeling. This happens mostly unconsciously now, after years of practice. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. It doesn't mean it's not requiring effort. Your face wants to reflect your actual emotional state. That's what faces do naturally. They express what's happening inside. But you've trained your face to do something else, to maintain a neutral or pleasant expression regardless of your actual feelings. And this training, this overriding of your natural facial responses, this requires constant micro-adjustments, constant corrections. Your face tries to show your exhaustion, and you correct it into looking alert. Your face tries to show your sadness, and you correct it into looking content. Your face tries to show your anxiety, and you correct it into looking calm. All day long, these tiny corrections are happening, and each one takes a small amount of energy, and those small amounts add up. The same is true for your voice. Speaking in a tone that doesn't match your emotional state requires effort. Your voice wants to reflect what you're feeling, wants to carry the weight of your experience, wants to express through pitch and volume and rhythm what's happening inside you. But you've learned to control it, to modulate it, to keep it within a range that sounds fine regardless of how you actually feel. So when you're exhausted, you force your voice to sound energetic. When you're sad, you force your voice to sound upbeat. When you're overwhelmed, you force your voice to sound capable. And this forcing, this constant management of your vocal expression, this is work. Work that happens so automatically you might not notice it, but work nonetheless. Work that drains your energy even as you're expending it. And then there's the cognitive load of managing what you say. Every sentence you speak gets filtered through an internal screening process. Before the words leave your mouth, before they become audible to anyone else, they pass through a checkpoint in your mind that asks, does this reveal too much? Does this suggest I'm not fine? Does this communicate need? Does this imply struggle? And if the answer is yes to any of those questions, the words get edited, modified, softened, sometimes blocked entirely. So the conversation happening in your mind is often completely different from the conversation happening out loud. In your mind, you're thinking about how hard something is. Out loud, you're saying it's manageable. In your mind, you're feeling overwhelmed. Out loud, you're saying you're handling it. This constant translation, this continuous gap between internal experience and external expression, this requires processing, power, mental energy, attention. And that energy has to come from somewhere. Usually it comes from the same pool of energy you need for everything else, which means you end up depleted not just from your actual challenges, but from the work of hiding those challenges from everyone around you. And what makes this particularly exhausting is that there's no break, no moment when you can fully let go of the performance. Even in spaces that are supposed to be safe, supposed to be restful, you often find yourself still performing, still monitoring, still managing your presentation. Because the pattern is so deeply ingrained that you don't know how to turn it off, don't know how to just be without also managing how you're being perceived. So you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, tired in a way that rest doesn't resolve. Because the exhaustion isn't just physical, it's the exhaustion that comes from being two people at once, the exhaustion that comes from maintaining a gap between appearance and reality, the exhaustion that comes from performing fine when you're not, day after day, interaction after interaction, with no end in sight and no relief available because relief would require dropping the performance, and dropping the performance feels more dangerous than continuing it. So you continue, you perform, you say you're fine, and you carry the weight of that performance alone, the way you carry everything else, quietly, privately, without anyone ever knowing just how much energy it takes to appear this okay when you're really not okay at all. Your smile has become a tool of concealment, not a genuine expression of feeling, though sometimes it might overlap with actual happiness. But more often, it's a deflection, a distraction, a way of communicating. Everything is okay here, no need to look closer, nothing to see, move along. You've learned to deploy this smile strategically, when someone's gaze lingers too long on your face, when a question gets too close to something real, when you sense that your internal state might be becoming visible. The smile emerges, automatic as breathing, and it does its job. People see it and relax. They take it as confirmation that you're fine. They stop looking, stop asking, stop wondering. And you've become so skilled at producing this smile on demand that even you sometimes forget it's not entirely real. Your face can smile while your heart is breaking. Your mouth can curve upward while your chest feels like it's caving inward. The smile and the suffering coexist, one visible, one hidden. And no one knows to question the smile. There's a particular muscle memory to this smile. Your face has learned exactly how to arrange itself to produce the appearance of contentment. The corners of your mouth lift just enough. The muscles around your eyes engage slightly, creating the small creases that suggest authenticity. Your cheeks rise, your expression softens. All of this happens without conscious direction. You don't think I need to smile now. Your face simply does it, responding to social cues with practiced efficiency. It's like your facial muscles have been programmed with a default setting, and that setting is a smile that communicates okayness, whether or not okayness exists. And what's remarkable is how convincing this smile can be. People trust smiles. They see a smile and their nervous system relaxes. They interpret it as a signal that everything is fine, that there's no threat here, that they can move on without concern. And you've learned to use this, not manipulatively, not with any malicious intent, but you've learned that a smile is the fastest way to end an inquiry. Someone looks at you with concern and you smile, and their concern dissipates. Someone asks if you're okay and you smile while saying yes, and they believe the smile more than they might believe the words alone. The smile is powerful, it's protective. It keeps people at a comfortable distance while appearing to invite them closer. But here's what happens when you smile while suffering. The disconnect between your external expression and your internal experience creates a kind of cognitive dissonance in your own mind. Your brain receives conflicting information. Your face is smiling, which typically signals positive emotion, but your internal state is painful, which signals negative emotion. And your brain tries to make sense of this contradiction. Sometimes it resolves the contradiction by dismissing the internal state. If I'm smiling, maybe things aren't that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm fine after all. The smile becomes evidence against your own experience. Proof that you can't trust what you're feeling. Because if you were really struggling, wouldn't your face show it? And so the smile, meant to protect you from others' scrutiny, ends up undermining your own relationship with your feelings. Other times the contradiction doesn't resolve. Your face smiles and your heart breaks, and both realities exist simultaneously without reconciliation. And this creates a particular kind of internal fragmentation. You become split. The part of you that performs and the part of you that suffers exist separately, each one real, each one you, but never quite integrated. You're the person who smiles at work while falling apart inside, the person who laughs at dinner while carrying grief no one sees, the person whose face suggests contentment while whose mind is screaming. And living in this split, maintaining this division between outer and inner, this becomes exhausting in ways that are hard to name. Because you're never whole, you're never just one thing, you're always divided, always fragmented, always performing one reality while experiencing another. And your smile has become so automatic that sometimes you catch yourself smiling when no one is even looking. You're alone in your car and your face is arranged in that pleasant expression. You're lying in bed at night and you notice your mouth is still holding the shape of okayness even though there's no audience. The performance has become so ingrained that you don't know how to turn it off. The smile appears even when it serves no purpose, even when there's no one to convince, even when you're completely alone with your actual feelings. It's like the smile has become fused to your face, and removing it would require effort you don't know how to make. But your body knows what your mouth won't say. Your body carries the truth your words deny, that tightness in your chest that never quite releases, the tension in your shoulders that has become so constant you don't even notice it anymore, the fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, the headaches that appear without clear cause, the stomach that twists when you have to face another day of performing fine. These physical symptoms are not random. They're not separate from your emotional experience. They're your body's way of expressing what you won't allow yourself to express verbally. Your body is saying we are not fine, even as your mouth continues to insist otherwise. And this disconnect, this split between what your body knows and what your words claim, creates a particular kind of suffering. Because you can ignore your feelings, you can dismiss your struggles, you can talk yourself out of your own experience, but you cannot argue with chronic pain. You cannot rationalize away exhaustion. You cannot convince your body that everything is fine when your body is literally manifesting the not fineness you keep trying to hide. The body doesn't lie the way the mind can lie. The body speaks in sensation, in physical reality that can't be explained away or minimized with words. And when you've spent years acting fine when you're not, when you've spent years suppressing your emotional truth, your body begins to hold that suppression in its tissues, in its muscles, in its nervous system. The unexpressed stress doesn't disappear. It gets stored, embodied, carried in ways that eventually become impossible to ignore. That chronic tension in your shoulders, that's not just muscle tightness. That's years of carrying weight you won't acknowledge. Every time you've said you're fine while holding back tears, while swallowing anger, while pushing down fear, your shoulders have risen slightly, bracing for impact, preparing to carry the burden. And they've stayed that way, day after day, month after month, year after year. Your shoulders have been holding the weight of everything you won't express, and now they've forgotten how to release. The tension has become structural. Your body has organized itself around the need to hold, contain, carry. And even when you try to relax, even when you consciously attempt to drop your shoulders, they resist. Because the pattern is so deeply ingrained that your body doesn't trust that it's safe to let go. The tightness in your chest is similar. It's the physical manifestation of feelings that need to move, need to be expressed, need to be released, but that you keep locked inside. Emotions are meant to flow through you. They're called emotions because they're meant to move, to have motion. But when you consistently suppress them, when you refuse to let them move through and out, they create pressure. That pressure has to go somewhere, and often it lodges in your chest, creating a sensation of constriction, of weight, of something sitting on your sternum that makes it hard to breathe fully. You might go to a doctor about this sensation. They might run tests, and often they find nothing medically wrong. Your heart is healthy, your lungs are clear, but the sensation persists. Because the problem isn't medical, it's emotional. It's the accumulated weight of everything you've refused to feel, refused to express, refused to acknowledge. The exhaustion you carry is another form of your body's truth-telling. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch. You can rest for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, and wake up still exhausted. Because the exhaustion isn't from physical exertion, it's from the constant effort of maintaining the performance, of holding yourself in a shape that doesn't match your actual experience, of managing two realities simultaneously, of never letting your guard down, never fully relaxing, never allowing yourself to just be without also controlling how you're perceived. This kind of vigilance, this constant self-monitoring, it drains energy at a cellular level. Your nervous system never gets to rest because it's always working, always managing, always maintaining the gap between what you are and what you appear to be. And then there are the symptoms that seem more random but that are actually quite specifically related to your emotional suppression. The digestive issues that flare when you're stressed but can't acknowledge the stress. The headaches that appear when you're overwhelmed but won't admit to the overwhelm. The skin problems that emerge when you're anxious but keep saying you're fine. Your body is remarkably literal in how it expresses what you won't say. The headache might be your mind's way of saying it can't hold one more thought, can't manage one more thing. The stomach issues might be your gut's way of rejecting what you're trying to swallow down, trying to digest emotionally. The skin breaking out might be what's breaking through from the inside, demanding to be seen when you won't let it be seen any other way. And here's what makes this particularly difficult. When you go to doctors with these symptoms, they often can't find a clear physical cause. And this can make you feel like you're imagining things, like you're making too much of physical sensations that aren't real problems. But they are real. The pain is real. The exhaustion is real. The physical experience is absolutely real. It's just that the origin is emotional rather than purely physical. Your body is holding what your words won't express, and until you find a way to express it, to release it, to let the emotional truth move through you rather than staying stored in your tissues, the physical symptoms will likely persist, because your body is trying to tell you something, and it will keep trying, keep manifesting symptoms, keep creating discomfort, until you finally listen. There is a specific loneliness that comes from appearing okay when you're not. It's not the loneliness of being physically alone, though that can be part of it. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who believe you're fine, who have no idea what you're actually experiencing, who see your performance and think that's who you are. You can be in a room full of friends, family, colleagues and feel completely isolated, because none of them are seeing you. They're seeing the version you've learned to show them, the edited, managed, controlled version. And this creates a particular kind of pain. The pain of being invisible while being seen, the pain of being present while remaining unknown, the pain of having dozens of people in your life who would say they know you, and yet none of them know you're struggling. None of them know you're barely holding together. None of them know that the person standing in front of them, smiling and nodding and saying, "I'm fine," is actually drowning. This loneliness has a quality that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. Because on the surface, your life might look full. You might have relationships, connections, people who care about you. You might have a partner who loves you, friends who enjoy your company, family who checks in regularly. And yet beneath all of this apparent connection, you feel profoundly alone. Because the connection is happening with your performance, not with your actual self. People are relating to the version of you that says you're fine, that appears capable, that seems to have everything under control. But that version isn't fully you. It's a partial you, an edited you. And so, the connection, while real in some ways, is also fundamentally incomplete. You can sit at dinner with people you love and feel like you're watching the scene from behind glass. You're there, you're participating, you're saying the right things and smiling at the right moments. But you're not really there. The real you, the one who's struggling, the one who's not fine, that version is hidden, locked away, kept private. And so, even though you're physically present, even though you're engaging in conversation, even though you're technically connecting, there's a part of you that remains completely isolated. The part that most needs connection, the part that's suffering, that part is alone, surrounded by people but alone. And what makes this loneliness particularly painful is that you're choosing it. Not consciously, perhaps, not deliberately, but you're the one maintaining the distance. You're the one keeping the truth hidden. You're the one saying you're fine when you're not. And so you can't even blame anyone else for the isolation. It's self-imposed, self-maintained. You're doing this to yourself. And knowing that you could theoretically be honest, could theoretically let people in, could theoretically drop the performance and reveal what's actually happening, but choosing not to because it feels too risky, too vulnerable, too dangerous, that knowledge adds another layer to the loneliness. The loneliness of knowing you're keeping yourself isolated. The loneliness of being the author of your own invisibility. People talk about feeling lonely in a crowd, and that phrase captures something of this experience. But it's not quite accurate, because you're not just lonely in the crowd. You're unknown in the crowd. You're performing in the crowd. You're maintaining a facade in the crowd while your actual self remains completely hidden, and the crowd accepts the facade, takes it at face value, believes you're fine, and so they laugh with you, they talk with you, they enjoy your company, but they're enjoying the performance, not the person. They're connecting with the mask, not the face beneath it. And you know this. You feel it. The gap between who they think you are and who you actually are creates a chasm that no amount of social interaction can bridge. And then there are moments when the loneliness becomes almost unbearable. Moments when you desperately want someone to see through the act. When you're at a gathering and you're performing fine and some part of you is silently screaming, "Please! Someone notice, someone see me, someone recognize that I'm not okay." But no one does, because your performance is too good, too convincing. You've trained people to believe you when you say you're fine. You've trained them not to look deeper, not to question, not to push past the surface. And so they don't. And you continue performing, continue being alone in the middle of connection, continue carrying everything by yourself while surrounded by people who love you but don't know you're suffering. Somewhere along the way you internalize the belief that you don't have permission to not be fine, that struggling is acceptable for other people but not for you, that other people can have hard days, difficult seasons, overwhelming circumstances, but you need to hold it together. You need to manage. You need to cope without assistance or acknowledgement or the messy vulnerability of admitting things are hard. And this belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from messages you absorbed, lessons you learned, patterns you observed. Maybe you were the strong one in your family, and strength meant never falling apart. Maybe you watched what happened to people who admitted they weren't okay and decided that couldn't be you. Maybe you tried once, tried to be honest about your struggle, and the response taught you that honesty wasn't safe. Whatever the origin, you learned to deny yourself the permission that you freely give to others, the permission to be human, to struggle, to need support, to not be fine sometimes. And without that permission, you continue the performance day after day, even when you're exhausted, even when you're breaking, even when the cost of fineness is becoming unbearable. This lack of permission operates like an internal law you can't break. It's not that you consciously think, "I'm not allowed to struggle." It's more automatic than that, more fundamental. It's like the rule is written into your operating system. Other people can struggle, but you cannot. Other people can fall apart, but you must hold together. Other people can need help, but you must be self-sufficient. And this rule feels absolute, unchangeable. Just the way things are, just the way you are. And when you do struggle, when circumstances become genuinely overwhelming, when you can't maintain the appearance of fine no matter how hard you try, you often experience shame. Not just sadness or exhaustion or frustration about your situation, but shame. Because struggling feels like a failure, feels like you're not doing what you're supposed to do, feels like you're breaking a rule, violating some unspoken code that says you, specifically you, need to be fine always. Other people get to struggle without shame, but your struggles feel like personal failings, like evidence that you're not strong enough, not capable enough, not managing yourself properly. This shame compounds the original difficulty. So now you're dealing with whatever actual challenge you're facing, plus the exhaustion of pretending you're not facing it, plus the shame of struggling in the first place. It's triple burden. The situation, the performance, and the shame. And all three reinforce each other. The situation is hard, so you perform fine to hide it, and then you feel ashamed that you're struggling, which makes you perform even harder, which makes you more exhausted, which makes the situation feel more overwhelming, which increases the shame. It's a cycle that feeds itself, growing larger and more consuming over time. And the permission you deny yourself, that's not just permission to struggle. It's permission to be human, permission to be imperfect, permission to have limits, to have needs, to have breaking points. You look at other people and you understand that they're human. You understand that humans struggle sometimes, that humans need support, that humans can't be fine all the time. You extend this understanding to everyone around you. But somehow you've exempted yourself from this universal human reality. You've decided, or learned, or been taught that these normal human experiences aren't acceptable for you, that you exist outside the range of normal human limitation, that you're supposed to transcend struggle rather than move through it. But here's the truth that you might not be ready to hear yet. You are human. You do have limits. You do struggle. And you're allowed to. You don't have to earn the right to not be fine through some demonstration of sufficient difficulty. You don't have to prove your struggles are legitimate before you're permitted to acknowledge them. You don't have to wait until you're completely broken before you're allowed to admit you're struggling. The permission exists already. It's part of being human. It's part of being alive. You just have to give it to yourself. Have to recognize that the rule you've been following, the one that says you're not allowed to struggle, that rule isn't universal law. It's a belief, a learned pattern. And beliefs, even deeply held ones, even ones that feel absolutely true, can be questioned, can be challenged, can eventually be changed. People accept you're fine at face value because it's easier than looking deeper. Because if they questioned it, they might have to do something about it, might have to offer support, provide comfort, make space for your struggle, and most people are already overwhelmed with their own lives. They don't have capacity for one more thing. So when you say you're fine, they believe you. Or more accurately, they choose to believe you. They don't ask follow-up questions, don't notice the tightness around your eyes, don't register the exhaustion in your voice. Don't wonder why you've become so quiet, so withdrawn, so different from how you used to be. And part of you is relieved by this. Relieved that your performance is working, that no one is pushing, that you can maintain your privacy. But another part of you, a part you might not even acknowledge, is disappointed, hurt, quietly hoping that someone would see through the act, someone would notice, someone would care enough to ask again, to look closer, to not accept the first answer you give. But they don't, and so you continue. Continue saying you're fine, continue being believed, continue carrying everything alone while appearing to carry nothing at all. And here's what's happening in those moments when someone accepts you're fine without question. They're making a choice, often unconsciously, to stay on the surface, to not go deeper. Because going deeper is uncomfortable. Going deeper requires time, energy, emotional capacity. Going deeper might mean witnessing pain they don't know how to help with. Might mean sitting with difficulty they can't fix. Might mean feeling helpless, or inadequate, or simply sad on your behalf. And most people, most of the time, don't want to feel those things. They'd rather believe you're fine. It's easier. It's more comfortable. It lets them move on with their day without taking on the weight of your struggle. So when you say you're fine, they accept it. They believe it. They let themselves be convinced even when there might be signs that suggest otherwise. Because questioning it, pushing deeper, asking the follow-up questions, that would require something from them. Would require them to slow down, to pay attention, to make space for whatever they might discover. And they're busy. They're overwhelmed. They're managing their own challenges. They don't have room for yours. So they take the easy answer, the comfortable answer, the answer that lets them off the hook. They hear I'm fine and they say good, glad to hear it. And they move on. And you watch them move on. Watch them accept the lie. Watch them choose comfort over truth. And something in you hardens just a little bit more. Because they could have looked closer, could have asked again, could have noticed. But they didn't. They chose not to. And that choice, that decision to accept your performance rather than questioning it, that confirms what you already believed, that people don't really want to know. That honesty would be unwelcome. That fine, even when it's false, is what everyone prefers. And yet, beneath your relief that no one is pushing, beneath your satisfaction that your performance is working, there's often a quiet disappointment. A small voice that hoped, just maybe, someone would see through it. Someone would care enough to look past the smile, past the I'm fine, past the carefully maintained appearance. Someone would notice the exhaustion you can't quite hide, would register the sadness you're trying to mask, would wonder about the distance that's grown between who you used to be and who you've become. You're not even sure what you'd want them to do if they did notice, what you'd say if they asked again. But some part of you longs for the noticing itself, for the evidence that someone cares enough to look closer, that someone sees you as more than just your performance, that someone recognizes you're struggling even when you say you're not. But they don't notice, or if they do, they don't mention it. They accept you're fine, they believe your smile, they take you at your word, and you continue performing, continue saying you're fine, continue watching people accept that answer without question, continue carrying everything alone, and the loneliness of this, the profound isolation of being believed when you're lying, of having your performance accepted when you wish it would be questioned, this loneliness settles into your bones, becomes part of who you are, part of how you move through the world, always visible but never seen, always present but never known, always saying you're fine while drowning in the space between what you say and what you carry. And no one asks the questions that might bridge that gap. So the gap remains and widens and becomes the space where you live, alone, even when you're surrounded by people who love you, even when you're in relationship, even when you're never actually by yourself. You're alone in the lie, alone in the performance, alone in the gap between what you are and what you appear to be. And that aloneness, that particular form of isolation, that becomes your constant companion, the thing you carry everywhere, the weight no one sees, the truth no one asks about, the struggle you bear in silence while everyone around you believes you're fine. When you act fine repeatedly, consistently over extended periods, something happens to the feelings you're not expressing. They don't disappear, they don't evaporate, they accumulate. Layer upon layer of unfelt feelings, unacknowledged struggles, unprocessed difficulties. Each time you say you're fine when you're not, you're adding weight to an internal load you're already carrying, and for a while, you can manage this accumulation. Your capacity is large, your strength is real. You've learned to carry more than most people even realize is possible to carry. But capacity has limits, strength can be depleted, and there comes a point when the accumulation becomes too much. When one more thing, one more difficulty, one more moment of pretending to be fine when you're falling apart, pushes you past your threshold. And that's when the breakdown happens, not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long without release, because you've been carrying too much for too long without help. Because fine, when it's a performance rather than a reality, is not sustainable indefinitely. Think of it like a container. When you experience difficulty and don't express it, when you struggle and don't acknowledge it, when you feel pain and don't release it, that experience doesn't just vanish. It goes somewhere. It gets stored. And the container where it gets stored is you, your body, your mind, your nervous system. And this container has capacity, real capacity. You can hold quite a lot actually, more than you probably realize, more than others might be able to hold. But the capacity is not infinite. The container has limits, and every time you add something to it without removing anything, every time you accumulate without releasing, you're filling the container a little bit more, and at first this accumulation is manageable. The container is large enough, there's room. You can add today's unexpressed stress to yesterday's unexpressed sadness, to last week's unexpressed frustration, to last month's unexpressed overwhelm. You can keep adding and adding, and the container holds it all. You continue functioning, continue performing, continue appearing fine, and on the outside nothing looks different. But inside, the container is filling, slowly, steadily, inevitably. And here's what makes this accumulation particularly insidious. You don't always notice it's happening, because you're adding small amounts at a time. Each individual moment of acting fine when you're not doesn't feel significant. Each time you swallow your words, suppress your feelings, maintain your performance, it feels like nothing. Just another day, just another interaction, just another instance of doing what you always do. But these small additions compound. They build on each other. They create a cumulative weight that grows heavier over time, even though each individual piece feels light. It's like gaining weight so gradually that you don't notice until your clothes don't fit anymore. Except instead of physical weight, it's emotional weight, psychological weight, the weight of everything you've carried alone, everything you've refused to acknowledge, everything you've kept hidden while pretending you're fine. And you don't notice it accumulating because the change is so gradual. You adapt, you adjust, you find ways to manage the increasing load, until one day you can't anymore, until one day the container is full. And one more thing, even one small thing, one tiny additional weight, becomes the thing that makes everything overflow. And the overflow, when it comes, often surprises you. Because the trigger doesn't match the response. Something relatively minor happens and you fall apart completely. Someone makes a small comment and you burst into tears. A minor inconvenience occurs and you feel rage that seems entirely disproportionate. A simple question gets asked and suddenly you're sobbing in a way that makes no sense to you or anyone watching. And people might say you're overreacting, might suggest you're being too sensitive, might wonder why you're making such a big deal out of something so small. But they don't understand. They don't see the container. They don't know about the accumulation. They only see the trigger, not the years of accumulated weight that made that trigger significant. The breakdown, when it comes, isn't about the immediate trigger. It's about everything that came before it. Every time you said you were fine when you weren't, every feeling you suppressed, every struggle you minimized, every moment you performed okayness while falling apart inside, all of it has been accumulating, building, creating pressure. And the breakdown is simply the moment when the pressure finally exceeds your capacity to contain it. It's not weakness, it's physics. It's the inevitable result of holding too much for too long without release. And what's particularly exhausting about this accumulation is that you can feel it happening even when you can't name it. You notice yourself getting tired in ways that sleep doesn't fix. You feel yourself becoming more irritable, more easily overwhelmed, less able to cope with things that used to feel manageable. You sense that something is building inside you, some kind of pressure that's growing, but you don't know what to do about it. So you do what you've always done. You keep performing, keep saying you're fine, keep adding to the container, keep hoping that somehow, if you just keep managing, if you just stay strong enough, you can avoid the overflow. But avoidance doesn't stop accumulation. It only delays the inevitable moment when everything you've been carrying finally becomes too much to hold. One of the ways you convince yourself to keep acting fine is by comparing your struggles to others' struggles and deciding yours aren't significant enough. You look around and see people dealing with objectively harder circumstances, people with diagnoses you don't have, people with losses you haven't experienced, people with challenges that seem more legitimate, more worthy of struggle, more deserving of support, and by comparison, your difficulties seem small, manageable, not worth mentioning. You tell yourself things like, other people have it worse, or I should be grateful, or this isn't that big of a deal. And these thoughts, while they might seem like perspective or gratitude, are actually a form of self-invalidation. They're ways of denying your own experience, ways of convincing yourself that you don't have the right to struggle, to need support, to not be fine. But pain is not a competition. Suffering is not relative. Your struggles don't become less real because someone else's struggles seem larger. Your experience doesn't become invalid because you can imagine harder circumstances. You're allowed to not be fine even when others have it worse. You're allowed to struggle even when you feel you should be grateful. The comparison is a trap that keeps you locked in performance, denying yourself the acknowledgement that your experience, whatever it is, matters. This comparison trap operates with its own internal logic. The logic goes something like this. If someone else has a bigger problem than mine, then my problem isn't really a problem. If someone else is dealing with more difficulty than I am, then I don't have the right to feel difficulty. If someone else's pain is more intense than mine, then my pain doesn't count. And this logic seems reasonable on the surface, seems like perspective, like gratitude, like not being self-centered or making too much of things, but actually it's a way of dismissing your own experience, a way of invalidating your own feelings, a way of convincing yourself that you need to keep performing fine because your not fineness isn't legitimate enough to deserve acknowledgement. And you can always find someone who has it worse. Always. No matter what you're going through, no matter how difficult your circumstances, you can look around and identify someone dealing with something harder. Someone with a more serious illness. Someone with a more tragic loss. Someone with more overwhelming responsibilities. Someone with fewer resources. Someone with more significant trauma. And if you use someone has it worse as the criterion for whether you're allowed to struggle, then you will never be allowed to struggle. Because there will always be someone worse off, always someone whose difficulties make yours seem small by comparison, But here's what this comparison ignores. Your experience is your experience. Your pain is your pain. Your struggle is your struggle. And it's real regardless of how it compares to anyone else's experience. You don't need to be experiencing the worst possible circumstances to deserve acknowledgement. You don't need to prove your suffering is significant enough to warrant support. You don't need to wait until your situation matches some imagined threshold of legitimate difficulty before you're allowed to admit you're not fine. Your experience matters simply because it's yours, because you're living it, because it's affecting you. And the comparison trap also ignores something crucial about how suffering works. Pain is not relative in the way you think it is. Two people can experience similar circumstances and have completely different levels of difficulty with those circumstances. One person's manageable is another person's overwhelming. One person's minor inconvenience is another person's breaking point. This isn't about weakness or strength. It's about individual capacity, individual resources, individual history, individual nervous system regulation. What's easy for someone else might be genuinely difficult for you. And that difficulty is valid. It's real. It deserves acknowledgement even if someone else wouldn't find it difficult. You also use this comparison as a way to generate shame about your struggles. You tell yourself you should be handling things better. You should be coping more effectively. You should be grateful for what you have rather than struggling with what you're experiencing. The should becomes a weapon you use against yourself, a way of adding judgment to your suffering. So now you're not just struggling, you're also ashamed of struggling. Not just having difficulty, but also feeling guilty about having difficulty. The comparison doesn't motivate you or help you cope. It just adds another layer of pain to the pain you're already carrying. And what's particularly insidious about this trap is how it masquerades as virtue. Telling yourself that others have it worse feels like humility, feels like perspective, feels like being mature and reasonable and not self-absorbed. So you might not even recognize it as the self-invalidation that it actually is. You might think you're being realistic, being grateful, being appropriately modest about your difficulties. But really you're denying yourself the basic acknowledgement that all humans deserve, the acknowledgement that your experience matters, that your feelings are valid, that your struggles are real, that you're allowed to not be fine even when you can imagine worse circumstances. The comparison trap keeps you locked in performance because it gives you a reason to stay there, a justification, a seemingly logical explanation for why you need to keep saying you're fine. Because if you acknowledged your struggles, if you admitted you're not fine, you'd be being self-indulgent, ungrateful, making too much of things. At least that's what the trap tells you. And so you stay quiet, stay performing, stay pretending. Not because you're actually fine, but because you've convinced yourself you don't have permission to be anything other than fine given that others have it worse. But the truth is simpler than that. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to not be fine. You're allowed to need support, regardless of how your circumstances compare to anyone else's. Your experience is valid simply because it's yours, and no amount of comparison can change that fundamental truth. You've been told you're strong, resilient, capable, someone who handles things well, someone who doesn't fall apart, someone who can be counted on to stay steady when everything else is chaos. And these statements, meant as compliments, have become a cage. Because being the strong one means you can never be weak. Being resilient means you can never break down. Being capable means you can never need help. You've internalized these labels as obligations, as roles you must continue performing. And so, even when you're not fine, even when you're struggling, even when you desperately need support, you maintain the appearance of strength. Because admitting you're not okay feels like failing to be who people expect you to be. Feels like disappointing everyone who's relied on your steadiness. Feels like proving that maybe you weren't actually as strong as everyone thought. And so, you continue. Continue being strong. Continue being resilient. Continue being capable. Even when the cost of maintaining that identity is your own well-being. Even when being strong for everyone else means never getting to be held by anyone yourself. The label started innocently enough. Maybe as a child you handled a difficult situation well and someone praised you for being strong. Or maybe you were the one who didn't cry when others were crying, who stayed calm when others were panicking, who kept it together when others were falling apart, and people noticed. They commented on it. They told you how mature you were, how resilient, how capable of handling difficult things, and these comments felt good. They felt like recognition, like acknowledgement, like proof that you were doing something right. But over time, these labels stopped being descriptions and became expectations. People started to rely on your strength, started to expect your resilience, started to assume your capability. And you felt the weight of those expectations, felt the pressure to continue being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't fall apart. Because if you fell apart, what would happen? Who would hold everything together? Who would be the steady one? The expectations became obligations, and the obligations became a cage. And here's what makes this particularly difficult. These qualities are real. You are strong. You are resilient. You are capable. These aren't false labels. You genuinely do have these capacities. You genuinely can handle difficult things. You genuinely do stay steady in circumstances that might overwhelm others. So the labels aren't wrong exactly, they're just incomplete. Because being strong doesn't mean you never struggle. Being resilient doesn't mean you never break down. Being capable doesn't mean you never need help. But somehow, the labels have come to mean exactly that. They've come to mean you're not allowed to be anything other than strong, resilient, capable. They've come to mean you can never be weak, never be vulnerable, never be the one who needs holding. And so, you continue performing these qualities even when you don't feel them, even when your strength is depleted, even when your resilience is exhausted, even when your capability has reached its limit, because people expect it, because people rely on it, because disappointing them, letting them down, proving that you're not actually as strong as they thought, these possibilities feel unbearable, so you maintain the performance. You continue being the strong one even when you're falling apart inside. You continue being resilient even when you have nothing left to draw on. You continue being capable even when you desperately need someone else to be capable for you. And the cost of this performance is enormous, because being strong for everyone else means never getting to be weak for yourself. Being the one who holds everyone means never getting to be held. Being the steady one in the storm means never getting to shelter from the storm. You become the support system for everyone around you while having no support system for yourself. You become the safe place for others while having nowhere safe to fall apart. You become the strength others lean on while having nothing to lean on yourself. And when you do struggle, when your strength finally gives out, when the resilience depletes, when the capability reaches its end, you often experience this as profound shame. Because struggling feels like failure, feels like you're not living up to who you're supposed to be, feels like you're disappointing everyone who's counted on you to be strong. So you hide the struggle, you suppress it, you pretend you're still fine even when you're breaking, because admitting weakness would shatter the identity you've built, would violate the role you've been performing, would prove to everyone that maybe you weren't actually as strong as they believed. But the truth that gets lost in all of this is simple. Being strong doesn't mean never needing support. Being resilient doesn't mean never breaking down. Being capable doesn't mean never asking for help. Real strength includes knowing when you've reached your limit. Real resilience includes allowing yourself to fall apart and then rebuilding. Real capability includes recognizing when something is beyond your capacity and seeking assistance. The labels, the identity, the role, they've all conspired to make you believe that strength means invulnerability. But that's not strength, that's performance. And the performance, no matter how convincing, no matter how long you maintain it, is exhausting you in ways that will eventually become unsustainable. There is an unspoken agreement in most social interactions, a contract that no one explicitly signs but everyone understands. The contract says, we all pretend to be fine unless something is dramatically, undeniably wrong. We keep our struggles private, we manage our emotions, we don't burden others with our internal difficulties, we maintain pleasant surfaces, we respond to "how are you?" with acceptable answers, and in exchange others will do the same for us. No one will ask uncomfortable questions. No one will push past our boundaries. No one will make us explain ourselves or reveal more than we want to reveal. This contract makes social interaction manageable, predictable, safe in a certain way. But it also makes genuine connection nearly impossible, because everyone is performing, everyone is pretending, everyone is fine. And beneath all this fineness, beneath all these acceptable surfaces, people are struggling, suffering, barely holding together. But the contract demands we hide this, demands we continue the performance, and so we do. We honour the contract, we stay fine, and everyone stays isolated in their private struggles, surrounded by other people who are also isolated in their private struggles, all of us performing fine together while each of us feels completely alone. This contract operates at such a deep level that most people aren't even aware they're following it. It's just how social interaction works. It's just what you do. You don't consciously think, I need to uphold the social contract of fineness. You just automatically know that when someone asks how you are, you give a fine answer. You know that when you're in social spaces, you maintain pleasant surfaces. You know that your struggles stay private. These aren't explicit rules anyone taught you. They're implicit understandings you absorbed simply by existing in society. And the contract serves important functions. It makes casual interaction possible. Imagine if every time someone asked, "How are you?" they actually wanted a thorough, honest answer. If every greeting became an opportunity for deep emotional sharing, social interaction would become impossible. You'd never get through the grocery store. You'd never complete a work meeting. You'd never have a brief chat with an acquaintance. The contract allows for surface-level interaction without the weight of genuine emotional exchange. It lubricates social machinery, makes everyday encounters manageable, but the contract also has a dark side, because it trains us to stay on surfaces, trains us to accept fine at face value, trains us not to look deeper, not to ask harder questions, not to push past the first answer we're given. And this training extends even into our closest relationships. Even with people we love, people we care deeply about, we often find ourselves honouring the contract, accepting their fine even when we suspect they're not, offering our own fine even when we're struggling. Because the contract is so deeply ingrained that breaking it feels uncomfortable, even in spaces that should be safe for honesty. And the contract creates a strange collective pretense. Everyone is pretending to be fine. Everyone knows everyone else is pretending, but everyone agrees to accept the pretense. It's like a play where all the actors know they're acting, but they continue performing their roles anyway, because that's what the script demands. You stand in a room full of people and everyone is saying they're fine and everyone is performing okayness, and underneath it all, most people are probably struggling with something, carrying something, not actually fine. But no one breaks character, no one disrupts the performance, no one says, actually I'm not fine, and I'm guessing you're not either, so why are we all pretending? Because breaking the contract feels risky, feels like violating social norms, feels like making others uncomfortable, feels like being too much, too intense, too honest in ways that aren't socially acceptable. So even when you desperately want to be honest, even when you're exhausted from performing, even when you're barely holding together, you continue honouring the contract. You continue saying you're fine. You continue maintaining the surface. You continue participating in the collective pretense that everyone is okay when almost no one is truly okay. And the isolation this creates is profound, because you're surrounded by people who are also struggling, also performing, also pretending to be fine. If you could all be honest with each other, if you could all drop the performance simultaneously, you'd discover you're not alone. You'd find connection in shared struggle. You'd realise that what you thought was your private shame is actually a universal human experience. But the contract prevents this discovery. The contract keeps everyone locked in their own private performance, convinced they're the only one struggling while everyone else is fine. And so the isolation persists. The loneliness continues. Everyone stays trapped in the contract, performing fine together while suffering alone. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, despite all your practice, despite how skilled you've become at performing fine, the mask slips. Something happens that's just overwhelming enough, just painful enough, just difficult enough that you can't maintain the performance. Maybe it's a small thing that becomes the final thing. Someone asks how you are with genuine concern in their voice, and something in you breaks. Or you're alone in your car and a song comes on and suddenly you're sobbing. Or you're at work and someone makes a minor mistake and you react with a rage that's disproportionate because it's not about the mistake at all. Or you're talking to a friend and they say something innocuous and you feel tears starting that you can't explain or control. These moments of cracking are terrifying. They feel like failure, like you've lost control of something you're supposed to be managing. And your first instinct is usually to stuff everything back down, to reconstruct the mask as quickly as possible, to apologise for the display of not fineness. But these cracks are actually your psyche's emergency release valve, your system trying to purge what can no longer be contained. They're not failures, they're your humanity forcing its way through the performance, your truth refusing to stay hidden any longer. The crack often comes without warning. You've been managing, you've been performing, you've been maintaining the appearance of fine through circumstances that would challenge anyone, and you've been successful at it. Nothing has slipped through. The mask has stayed firmly in place, until suddenly, it doesn't. Until one moment, one small trigger, one tiny thing creates a fissure in your carefully maintained facade, and everything starts pouring through that fissure before you can stop it. And what's striking about these moments is how disproportionate they often feel. The trigger is small, insignificant, something that shouldn't matter, shouldn't affect you, shouldn't create the response it creates. But your response is enormous, overwhelming, completely out of proportion to the trigger itself. And this disproportion is confusing, both to you and to anyone witnessing it. You might think, why am I crying over this? This is ridiculous. I need to get control of myself. And others might think, they're really overreacting. This isn't that big of a deal. But what everyone is missing, what the disproportion reveals, is that it's not about the trigger. It's never about the trigger. The trigger is just the final straw, the thing that broke through the dam, the small breach that allowed the enormous pressure behind it to finally escape. What's pouring through in these moments isn't just feeling about the immediate situation. It's everything you've been holding back, everything you've been suppressing, everything you've been carrying alone, all the times you said you were fine when you weren't, all the struggles you minimized, all the pain you dismissed, all the exhaustion you ignored. All of it has been building pressure, creating force, demanding release. And the crack is simply the moment when the structure you've been maintaining can no longer contain that pressure. When the performance finally breaks under the weight of everything it's been holding. And these moments are terrifying because they feel like loss of control. You've been managing yourself so carefully, so consistently, so completely, and suddenly you're not managing anymore. Your emotions are expressing themselves without your permission. Your truth is becoming visible whether you want it to be or not. The private is becoming public. The hidden is becoming seen. And this exposure feels dangerous, feels vulnerable, feels like everything you've been protecting yourself from is now happening. Your first instinct in these moments is usually damage control. Stuff it back down, reconstruct the mask, apologize profusely, explain it away. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just tired. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. I'm fine, really, I'm fine. You try to minimize what just happened. Try to reassure everyone, including yourself, that this was an aberration, a momentary lapse, nothing to worry about. You're fine, you're still fine, everything is fine, please forget this happened. Please don't look too closely at what just emerged. Please let me reconstruct my mask and return to the performance we all agreed to maintain. But here's what these cracks actually are. What they actually mean, what they actually represent. They're not failures, they're not weaknesses, they're not evidence that you can't manage yourself. They're evidence that you're human, that you have limits, that you've been carrying more than anyone should carry alone, that the performance, no matter how skilled, no matter how practiced, cannot be maintained indefinitely. That pressure, when it builds long enough, strong enough, must eventually find release. And the crack is that release. It's your system taking care of itself in the only way it knows how, when you won't take care of it consciously. It's your truth forcing its way through, because it can no longer stay contained. It's your humanity asserting itself despite your best efforts to keep it hidden. And while these moments feel catastrophic in the experience of them, they're actually necessary. They're pressure valves preventing complete collapse. They're emergency releases preventing total system failure. Without these cracks, without these moments of breakthrough, the accumulation would continue until something more serious broke. So the crack, uncomfortable as it is, exposing as it is, frightening as it is actually your psyche protecting you from the consequences of maintaining the performance forever, protecting you from carrying more than you can carry, protecting you from the complete breakdown that would come if you never had these small releases. The crack is not the problem, the crack is the symptom. The problem is everything that made the crack necessary, everything you've been holding alone, everything you've been pretending is fine when it's not, everything that's been accumulating while you've been performing. That's the problem. The crack is just the inevitable result. On the rare occasions when you do admit you're not fine, when circumstances force honesty or exhaustion makes performance impossible, there's often an aftermath that confirms why you usually stay closed. Sometimes people minimize what you share. It could be worse. At least you don't have to deal with, I'm sure it's not that bad. Sometimes they immediately try to fix it, offering solutions you didn't ask for, advice that doesn't apply, action steps that miss the point entirely. Sometimes they make it about themselves. I know exactly what you mean and suddenly you're listening to their story instead of being heard in yours. Sometimes they get uncomfortable and change the subject. Sometimes they gossip about it later. Sometimes they treat you differently afterward, with either pity or distance. And these responses, these various ways people fail to hold your vulnerability with care, reinforce the pattern. They confirm what you suspected all along. That being honest about not being fine creates problems, that people don't actually want to know, that the performance is safer, that fine, even when it's a lie, is what everyone prefers, and so you return to it. Return to the mask. Return to the automatic "I'm fine." Because the cost of honesty felt greater than the cost of pretending. The minimizing is perhaps the most common response. You finally gather the courage to say you're struggling, and the immediate response is to make your struggle smaller, to suggest it's not as bad as you think it is, to point out how it could be worse, and on the surface this might seem like an attempt to make you feel better, like they're trying to offer perspective, to help you see the bright side, to remind you of what you have rather than what you're lacking. But what it actually does is dismiss your experience. It says your feelings aren't proportionate to your circumstances. It says you're overreacting, being too sensitive, making too much of things. And you hear this dismissal loud and clear. And when your feelings get minimized, when your struggle gets reduced to something that's not that bad, you feel something specific. Shame, embarrassment, regret for having spoken at all. Because if your struggle isn't significant enough to deserve acknowledgement, then sharing it was a mistake. You've revealed something that didn't merit revelation. You've asked for support you didn't deserve. You've burdened someone with something that wasn't actually a burden worth sharing. And so you shut down, shut back up, return to the safety of keeping everything inside. Because at least when you keep it inside, no one can tell you it's not significant enough to matter. Then there's the fixing, the immediate leap to solutions. You share that you're struggling, and before you've even finished explaining what you're struggling with, they're already telling you what you should do. Have you tried this? What about that? You should really consider this other thing. And they mean well. They genuinely think they're helping. But what you needed wasn't solutions. What you needed was witnessing. Someone to simply hear you, to acknowledge your experience, to sit with you in the difficulty without trying to make it go away. But instead, you get a list of action items, suggestions that may or may not be applicable, advice that makes you feel like your struggle is a problem that should be easily solved if you just do the right things. And the fixing response carries an implicit message. The message is, your struggle is fixable, therefore you should fix it. Therefore, if you're still struggling, it's because you're not doing the right things. It turns your struggle into a failure of problem solving, and that feels terrible, because you're doing the best you can, you're trying, you're managing as well as you know how, and being told all the things you should be doing implies that what you're doing isn't enough, that you're the problem, that if you just tried harder, implemented better strategies, followed the right advice, you wouldn't be struggling anymore. And so the fixing, meant to help, actually makes you feel worse, makes you feel inadequate, makes you wish you'd never said anything at all. And then there's the self-centering. You share your struggle and somehow, within minutes, the conversation has shifted to their struggle. They're telling you about their experience, their difficulty, their story, and you end up in the strange position of listening to them, supporting them, attending to their feelings when you were the one who needed support. And this happens so subtly you might not even notice it's happening until the conversation is over, and you realize you never got to finish sharing what you started to share. They took your vulnerability and made it about themselves, and you let them because that's what you do. You support others, you listen to others, you attend to others, even when you were trying, just this once, to be the one who's attended to. Sometimes the response is simply discomfort. You can see it on their face, in their body language, in how quickly they want to change the subject. Your honesty has made them uncomfortable, and now you're managing their discomfort instead of being supported in your struggle. You start backtracking, minimizing, saying, "It's really not that bad," or "I'm probably just tired," or "Sorry, I don't know why I brought that up." You start comforting them about your own distress, reassuring them that you're fine. Really, don't worry about it. And the irony isn't lost on you. You tried to be honest and ended up performing fine anyway because your honesty created discomfort you felt responsible for managing, and sometimes the aftermath comes later. You share something vulnerable, and at the time the response seems okay, but then you find out later that they talked about it with others. Your private struggle became gossip, or they start treating you differently, with pity that makes you feel small, with excessive concern that feels suffocating, with distance that suggests they don't know how to be around you anymore now that they know you're not always fine. And these change dynamics confirm your worst fears, that vulnerability changes things, that being honest about struggle damages relationships, that people prefer the version of you that's fine, that the mask is necessary not just for your protection, but for the comfort of everyone around you. And so you learn. You learn from each of these experiences. You learn that honesty is risky, that vulnerability often goes wrong, that people, even people who love you, often don't know how to hold your not fineness with care. And these lessons reinforce the pattern, strengthen the walls, confirm the wisdom of staying closed. You return to the performance with renewed commitment. Because the alternative, being honest, and having your honesty mishandled, that feels worse than carrying everything alone. At least alone, no one can minimize your experience. At least alone, no one can make it about themselves. At least alone, you maintain control over your struggle. And control, even lonely control, feels safer than vulnerable honesty that gets met with responses that hurt more than they help. Inside your mind, there's a constant conversation happening about whether to maintain the performance or admit the truth. One part of you wants to be honest, wants to say, actually, I'm not fine, I'm struggling, I'm overwhelmed, I need help. This part is tired of performing, tired of carrying everything alone, tired of the gap between internal reality and external presentation. But there's another part, often louder, often more powerful, that argues against honesty. This part lists all the reasons to stay quiet, all the ways admitting struggle could go wrong, all the evidence from past experiences that vulnerability isn't safe. This part reminds you that you've managed this long without help, so you can keep managing, that other people have their own problems, that your struggles aren't significant enough to mention, that you'll be fine, you just need to push through. And this internal debate happens in fractions of seconds, often beneath conscious awareness. By the time someone finishes asking, "How are you?" the debate has already concluded. The protective part has won, and your mouth is already saying, "I'm fine," before you've even fully considered telling the truth. This internal dialogue is so constant, so persistent, that it becomes like background noise you barely notice anymore. But if you could slow it down, if you could really listen to what's happening in your mind when someone asks how you are, you'd hear an entire conversation unfolding at lightning speed. The honest part speaks first, usually. That immediate impulse toward truth. The recognition that you're not fine and the momentary consideration of saying so. I could tell them, I could be honest, I could say I'm struggling. But before that impulse can translate to action, before those words can form on your tongue, the protective part intervenes. And this part has an entire arsenal of arguments it deploys in milliseconds. Don't say that. Remember what happened last time you were honest? Remember how they responded? Remember how uncomfortable it made everyone? Remember how you regretted it? The protective part isn't being mean. It's trying to keep you safe. It's operating from all the lessons you've learned about what happens when you're vulnerable. And its arguments are compelling because they're based on real experience. Real moments when honesty went badly. Real evidence that vulnerability often isn't safe, and the protective part has different strategies depending on the situation. Sometimes it uses fear. If you tell them you're struggling, they'll think less of you. They'll see you as weak. They'll lose respect for you. Sometimes it uses comparison. Other people are dealing with harder things and they're managing fine. Your struggle isn't significant enough to mention. Sometimes it uses practicality. What good would it do to tell them anyway? They can't fix it. You'd just be burdening them for no reason. Sometimes it uses identity. You're the strong one. You're the one who handles things. This isn't who you are. And the honest part tries to argue back. But I'm tired. I'm so tired of carrying this alone. I need help. I need someone to know. But the protective part is usually more powerful. It's been reinforced by years of experience. It's been proven right again and again. It knows that staying quiet is safer than speaking up. It knows that fine, even when false, creates fewer problems than honesty. And so it wins. It wins the argument. It shuts down the impulse toward honesty. It keeps you locked in the performance. And this entire debate, this whole internal conversation, it happens so fast that you're often not even consciously aware it occurred. You just know that someone asked how you are and you said you're fine and you didn't even consider saying anything else. The protective part has become so automatic, so efficient, that it intercepts the question before your honest self even has a chance to formulate a response. It's like having a bodyguard in your mind who stands at the gate between your internal experience and your external expression, screening everything that tries to pass through, blocking anything that might threaten your safety. And over time, the honest part gets quieter, gets weaker, stops trying as hard to be heard. Because it keeps losing, it keeps getting shut down by the protective part, so eventually it stops arguing, stops suggesting honesty as an option, and the protective part becomes the only voice, the only response, the automatic default that answers every inquiry with some version of fine. And you lose touch with the possibility of honesty, lose touch with the part of you that wants to be real, wants to be seen, wants to drop the performance and simply be. That part still exists, but it's buried so deeply beneath the protective mechanism that you might not even remember it's there. And the tragic irony is this: the protective part, the one that keeps you locked in performance, the one that prevents honesty, it thinks it's protecting you. And in some ways, it is. It's protecting you from the risk of vulnerability going wrong, from the discomfort of exposure, from the potential of being misunderstood or dismissed or hurt. But what it can't protect you from is the cost of never being honest, the cost of carrying everything alone, the cost of never being truly known. The protective part keeps you safe from one kind of pain, but in doing so, it locks you into another kind, the pain of isolation, the pain of performance, the pain of being fine when you're not. And that pain, that chronic low-grade suffering, that might be worse in the long run than the acute risk of vulnerable honesty would have been. But the protective part doesn't see it that way. It just sees danger in honesty, safety in pretense. And so it keeps you locked in the pattern, keeps you saying you're fine, keeps you alone in your struggle because alone feels safer than the risk of reaching out. Acting fine when you're not fundamentally changes your relationships. It creates distance even in your closest connections. Because intimacy requires honesty. Real closeness requires letting people see you, not just the managed version you present, but your actual self, including your struggles. And when you consistently perform fine, when you never let anyone see your difficulties, your relationships stay surface level even when they feel deep. Your partner might love you but not really know you. Your friends might care about you but not understand what you're going through. Your family might be close to you but completely unaware of your internal experience. And this creates a painful paradox. You're surrounded by people who love you, but you feel alone. You're in relationships, but you feel disconnected. You have people who would help if they knew you needed help, but they don't know because you never tell them. The performance that protects you also isolates you. The mask that keeps you safe also keeps you unknown. And over time, this takes a toll that's hard to name but impossible to ignore. Think about what intimacy actually requires. It requires vulnerability. It requires letting someone see past your defenses, past your carefully maintained presentation, into the messy, complicated, struggling parts of you. It requires revealing not just your strengths, but your weaknesses, not just your capabilities, but your limitations, not just your joys, but your sorrows. Real intimacy happens when both people can be fully themselves, including the parts that aren't fine, the parts that need support, the parts that struggle and stumble and sometimes fall apart. But you can't have that kind of intimacy when you're performing, when you're maintaining a facade, when you're only showing the acceptable, managed, fine version of yourself. And so your relationships exist in this strange state. They might look intimate from the outside. You spend time together, you have conversations, you share experiences, there's affection, commitment, care. But underneath all of that, there's a gap, a distance, a space between who you actually are and who you're allowing them to see. And this gap prevents true closeness, prevents the kind of deep knowing that real intimacy creates, because they can only know what you show them. They can only understand what you share. And if you're not sharing your struggles, not showing your difficulties, not revealing when you're not fine, then they're only seeing part of you. They're only knowing the edited version, the performance. And here's what makes this particularly painful. You might have a partner who loves you deeply, who's committed to you, who would do anything for you, but they don't really know you, because you haven't let them know you, not fully. They know the version of you that's always capable, always managing, always fine, but they don't know the version that struggles, that feels overwhelmed, that sometimes barely holds together. So their love, genuine as it is directed toward an incomplete picture of who you are. And some part of you knows this, knows that you're not fully seen, knows that the love you receive is for the performance rather than the person. And that creates its own kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being loved by someone who doesn't fully know you. The same is true for friendships. You might have friends you've known for years, people you care about deeply, people who consider you close friends. But the friendship exists on the surface. You talk about safe things, surface things. You share activities, experiences, maybe even emotional support for them when they need it. But you never reveal your own struggles, never share your own difficulties, never let them see you as anything other than fine. And so, the friendship, while real in many ways, remains limited. Limited to the depth you're willing to reveal. Limited to the parts of you you're willing to show. And they probably have no idea this limitation exists. They probably think they know you well. But they don't. They know the character you play, the role you perform, not the full person underneath. And the paradox is excruciating. You're lonely in your relationships because you're not revealing yourself in your relationships. You're isolated because you're maintaining isolation. You're unknown because you're choosing to remain unknown. It's self-imposed, self-maintained. And yet it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels necessary. It feels like protection. It feels like the only way to keep yourself safe. But the cost of that safety is connection. The cost of that protection is intimacy. The cost of staying hidden is staying alone even when you're surrounded by people who would hold you if you'd let them. But you don't let them, can't let them. The risk feels too great, and so you stay lonely, stay disconnected, stay in relationships that feel incomplete, even though the incompleteness is your own creation, your own protection, your own cage. After performing fine for long enough, a strange question emerges. Who are you really? Are you the person who's struggling, or are you the person who appears fine? Is the internal experience the truth, or is the external presentation the truth? And this question becomes genuinely confusing, because you've been doing both for so long. You've been feeling one way while appearing another way for so many years that the line between authentic self and performed self has blurred. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering if maybe you really are fine. Maybe the struggle isn't as real as it feels. Maybe you're making too much of things. Maybe the performance has become reality. But then something happens. A moment alone where the mask drops. A night when you can't sleep because everything you've been holding catches up with you. A morning when getting out of bed feels impossible. And you remember, you're not fine. You've just become incredibly skilled at acting like you are. The performance is not your identity, it's your protection. But sometimes, the protection has been in place for so long that you've forgotten what you're protecting. You've forgotten who you are beneath the mask. This identity confusion is not something you consciously think about every day. It's more like a background uncertainty, a fundamental question about self that surfaces in quiet moments, when you're alone, when the performance drops because there's no audience, when you have space to actually check in with yourself rather than managing how you're perceived. In those moments, the question arises, who am I? Am I the person I appear to be? Or am I the person I feel like inside? And the fact that there's a question at all, the fact that these might be two different people, that itself is disorienting. Because normally, for most people, who they are and how they appear match reasonably well. There might be some gap, some editing, some management of presentation. But the core remains consistent. They're essentially the same person inside and outside. But for you, the gap has grown so large that you genuinely don't know which version is real. The external version, the one everyone sees, is calm, capable, managing well, handling everything, fine. The internal version, the one only you experience, is struggling, exhausted, overwhelmed, barely holding together, definitely not fine. And both feel real. Both exist simultaneously. So which one is actually you? Sometimes you find yourself believing the external version. You look at your life from the outside and think, maybe I am fine. Maybe I'm handling this well. Maybe I'm stronger than I think I am. You've been performing fine for so long that the performance starts to feel like evidence. Like maybe you're not performing at all. Maybe you actually are fine and you're just overthinking things, being too self-critical, making too much of normal stress. The external presentation becomes a kind of mirror you use to judge yourself. If I look fine, maybe I am fine. If I'm functioning, Maybe I'm not actually struggling. Maybe the internal experience is the lie and the external presentation is the truth, but then the internal experience asserts itself, usually at night, usually when you're alone, usually when there's no performance to maintain because there's no audience to perform for, and in those moments the truth of your struggle becomes undeniable. You're not fine. You haven't been fine. The struggle is real. The exhaustion is real. The overwhelm is real. The pain you've been carrying is real. And you realize that the external fineness isn't reality. It's performance. It's management. It's what you show the world, not what you actually are. In these moments, you remember who you really are. The person underneath the mask, the one who struggles, the one who hurts, the one who needs support but doesn't ask for it. That's the real you, the struggling one, not the fine one. But by morning, the question often returns, because you have to put the mask back on, have to return to the performance. And once you're performing again, once you're functioning again, once you're appearing fine again, the doubt creeps back in. Maybe last night's realization was the distortion. Maybe late night feelings aren't trustworthy. Maybe you were just tired. Maybe the performance is who you actually are and the struggle is just occasional moments of weakness that don't define you. The confusion cycles, back and forth, real self or performed self, struggling self or fine self, internal truth or external presentation. And you genuinely don't know, can't tell, have lost the ability to definitively answer the question of who you actually are. And this confusion about identity creates its own kind of suffering, because not knowing who you are is fundamentally destabilizing. It creates uncertainty at the core of your being, makes you question your own experience, makes you doubt your own perceptions. Are you someone who's struggling or someone who's fine? Are you strong or are you barely holding together? Are you capable or are you performing capability? The fact that you can't answer these questions with certainty, the fact that both might be true simultaneously, this creates a split in your sense of self that's difficult to live with. You become two people, the public person and the private person, the fine person and the struggling person. And you move between these identities so seamlessly that you lose track of which one is authentic. Maybe both are, maybe neither is. Maybe the real you is lost somewhere in the gap between them, lost in the space between internal and external, lost in the performance you've maintained so long you can't remember what existed before it. There's a particular grief that comes from realizing how many moments you've gone through alone that you didn't have to go through alone, how many difficult days you endured without support, how many painful experiences you processed in isolation, how many times you needed someone and didn't reach out because you'd trained yourself to handle everything independently. This grief isn't about blame. It's not about regretting your choices. It's simply the sadness of recognizing what you've missed, the comfort you didn't receive, the understanding you didn't experience, the connection you didn't allow. You were doing what you needed to do to survive. You were protecting yourself in the only way you knew how. But there's still loss in that protection. Loss of the support that might have made things easier. Loss of the witnessing that might have made you feel less alone. Loss of the connection that might have sustained you through the difficulty. And sometimes, in quiet moments, you feel this grief. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet ache for all the times you said you were fine when you weren't. All the moments you could have been held but chose to hold yourself instead. All the connections that might have deepened if you'd allowed people to see you struggling. This grief often comes unexpectedly. You'll be going about your day and suddenly you remember a specific moment. A time when you were really struggling and someone asked if you were okay, and you said you were fine. And now, looking back, you can see that person might have helped, if you'd been honest. They might have supported you. They might have made that difficult time less difficult. But you didn't give them the chance. You kept everything hidden. You carried it alone. And now there's sadness about that. Not regret exactly, not self-blame, just grief. Simple, clean grief for what didn't happen. For the support you didn't receive because you didn't reveal you needed support. And it's not just one moment, it's hundreds of moments, thousands of moments, years of moments when you could have been honest and weren't, years of struggling alone when you didn't have to struggle alone, years of performing fine when people who loved you would have held you if you'd let them. And when you really let yourself see the accumulation of all these moments, all these missed opportunities for connection and support, the grief can feel overwhelming. It's the grief of recognizing how isolated you've kept yourself, how much you've missed by staying hidden, How many relationships could have been deeper if you'd been willing to be vulnerable? There's grief too for the person you might have been if you'd had more support, if you'd allowed yourself to struggle without shame, if you'd let people help you carry what you've been carrying alone. You might have been lighter, less exhausted, less depleted. You might have had more energy for joy, for creativity, for growth, for living rather than just surviving. But all that energy went into performing, into maintaining the mask, into carrying everything alone. And that feels like a loss of potential, a loss of the life you might have lived if you'd felt safe enough to not be fine. And there's grief for the relationships themselves, for what they could have been if you'd been more open, if you'd let people see you. Your friendships could have been deeper, your romantic relationships could have been more intimate, your family connections could have been more genuine, but instead they stayed surface, stayed limited to what you were willing to reveal, and that limitation was your doing, your choice, your protection. And yet it's still a loss, still something to grieve, the closeness that might have existed if you'd been brave enough or safe enough to drop the performance and just be real. But perhaps the deepest grief is this, the grief for yourself, for the you that's been carrying everything alone, for the you that's been struggling without acknowledgement, for the you that's been performing fine while falling apart inside. There's grief for how hard it's been, for how much you've endured without support, for how lonely the journey has been, for how exhausting the performance has become. You've been so strong, so resilient, so capable, but at what cost? At the cost of ever getting to be weak, at the cost of ever getting to rest, at the cost of ever getting to be held. And when you let yourself feel that cost, when you really acknowledge what you've sacrificed in the name of appearing fine, there's grief, deep, quiet, persistent grief for the you that deserved support but didn't ask for it, the you that needed comfort but didn't accept it, the you that wanted connection but stayed hidden. That grief is valid, that grief is real, and that grief, more than anything, speaks to how hard this has been, how costly the performance has become, how much you've lost by staying locked in the pattern of acting fine when you're not. Your nervous system knows you're not fine even when your words say otherwise, because your nervous system doesn't lie, doesn't perform, doesn't participate in social niceties. It simply responds to your actual experience, your actual stress level, your actual emotional state. And when there's a disconnect between what you're experiencing and what you're expressing, your nervous system bears the cost. It stays activated, remains in a state of heightened alert, never fully relaxes because it's managing both the actual stress you're experiencing and the additional stress of hiding that stress. This creates a baseline of dysregulation that becomes your normal. You exist in a constant state of mild hypervigilance. Your body never fully settles, your breath never fully deepens, your muscles never fully release, and this chronic activation, this perpetual state of holding, creates its own symptoms. Anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, depression that doesn't have an obvious trigger, exhaustion that rest doesn't resolve, irritability that feels disproportionate. These aren't separate problems. They're the natural consequence of maintaining the performance of fine while your nervous system knows you're not. The body keeps the score, and the score in your case shows that acting fine when you're not has a physiological cost that accumulates over time. The nervous system operates below the level of conscious choice. It's ancient, primitive, designed to keep you alive by responding to threat, by reading your environment, by preparing your body for whatever's coming. And it does this continuously, automatically, without asking permission, without consulting your preferences about how you'd like to appear. It simply responds to what's true, to what's actually happening. And when what's actually happening is struggle, difficulty, overwhelm, your nervous system responds accordingly. It activates, prepares, mobilizes resources, gets ready to deal with the challenge. But here's what happens when you're performing fine while struggling internally. Your nervous system activates in response to the actual stress, but you're not allowing that activation to complete. You're not allowing the response to finish. You're holding it in, suppressing it, managing it so it doesn't show on the outside. And this creates a situation where your nervous system is stuck in a state of incomplete activation. It's mobilized for action, but not allowed to act. Prepared for response, but required to stay still. Ready to express, but forced to contain. And this incomplete activation doesn't just dissipate. It doesn't simply go away because you're pretending everything is fine. It stays in your system, creates a baseline of tension, of activation, of readiness that never gets to discharge. Your nervous system essentially stays in a state of perpetual standby, never fully activated into crisis mode, but never fully relaxed into safety either. Just hovering in this middle zone of chronic, mild activation that becomes so constant you stop noticing it's there. This is what trauma researchers talk about when they discuss the window of tolerance. There's a range of activation where your nervous system functions optimally, where you can respond to stress without becoming overwhelmed and can relax without becoming shut down. But when you're chronically performing fine while not being fine, you start living outside that optimal window. You exist in a state of hyper-arousal that's become your baseline. And because it's your baseline, because it's constant, you don't recognize it as activation anymore. You just think this is how life feels. This is how you are. Slightly anxious all the time, slightly on edge, slightly unable to fully relax. You think it's your personality, but it's not. It's your nervous system responding to the chronic stress of the disconnect between your internal experience and your external expression. And this chronic activation manifests in specific ways. You might notice you startle easily. A sudden noise makes you jump more than it seems to affect others. Or you might notice your sleep is disrupted. You have trouble falling asleep because your system won't settle. Or you wake frequently, your nervous system pulling you out of deep sleep because it doesn't feel safe enough to fully let go. Or you might notice your digestion is affected. Your stomach is sensitive, reactive, uncomfortable more often than not. Because your nervous system, when it's in a state of activation, diverts resources away from digestion and toward immediate survival functions. You might also notice emotional reactivity that seems out of proportion. Small frustrations create big reactions. Minor disappointments feel devastating. Tiny stresses overwhelm you in ways that don't make logical sense. But this isn't about logic, it's about nervous system capacity. When you're already operating at a baseline of chronic activation, you have less capacity for additional stress. Your system is already near its threshold, so things that might be manageable if you are starting from a regulated baseline become overwhelming because you're not starting from regulation. You're starting from chronic activation, and there's not much room between where you are and complete overwhelm, and the body keeps track of all of this, keeps a record, not in your conscious memory, but in your tissues, in your nervous system, in the patterns of tension and activation that become structured into how you exist in the world. Researchers like Bessel van der Kolk have written extensively about this, about how the body keeps the score of our experiences, particularly our unprocessed, unexpressed experiences. And performing fine when you're not is exactly the kind of experience that gets stored in the body. The stress you're experiencing but not expressing, the activation you're feeling but not releasing, all of it gets held in your system, creating patterns of tension and dysregulation that persist until they're addressed. And addressing them requires acknowledging the disconnect, requires recognizing that your nervous system is responding to something real, that the chronic tension, the hypervigilance, the symptoms that seem to have no clear cause, these aren't random. They're not signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that your nervous system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's responding to the stress of maintaining a performance that doesn't match your reality. It's holding the truth your words won't speak. And until you find ways to close that gap, to bring your external expression more in line with your internal experience, your nervous system will continue bearing the cost, will continue staying activated, will continue keeping score, and the score will continue to accumulate until the body demands that you finally acknowledge what it's been trying to tell you all along, that you're not fine, and that pretending you are has a cost that compounds with every day you maintain the pretense. Occasionally, rarely, someone sees through your performance. Someone looks at you when you say you're fine and doesn't believe you. Someone asks, "Are you really okay?" with genuine concern. Someone notices the exhaustion you're trying to hide, the pain you're trying to mask, the struggle you're trying to manage alone. And this moment is both what you've been wanting and what terrifies you. Because being seen, truly seen, means the performance has failed, means your protection has been penetrated, means someone has access to your vulnerability, whether you granted that access or not. Your first instinct is usually to reinforce the mask. I'm really fine, I promise. I'm just tired. It's nothing, don't worry about it. You deflect, you minimize, you redirect attention away from yourself, because even though part of you desperately wants someone to see you, another part knows that being seen means things will change. That person will worry, they'll ask questions, they'll want to help, and help, as much as you might need it, feels uncomfortable, requires receiving, requires admitting need, requires letting someone in. So even when someone offers you the gift of their seeing, their noticing, their caring, you often can't accept it, can't let them past the wall, can't admit that yes, actually they're right, you're not fine at all. When someone sees through your performance, there's a moment of panic, a flash of exposure, like being caught doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, except what you're being caught doing is simply being human, simply struggling, simply not being as fine as you've been claiming. But in that moment, it doesn't feel like being seen in your humanity. It feels like being caught in a lie, like your cover has been blown, like the protection you've carefully maintained has been breached without your consent, and the panic activates your defenses immediately, automatically. You don't consciously decide to deflect. Your system just does it. The same protective mechanism that keeps you saying you're fine when you're not, that same mechanism now works to rebuild the facade that someone just saw through. "I'm really fine" comes out of your mouth before you've even registered what you're saying. The reassurance is automatic, the minimizing is reflexive. "I'm just tired," or "It's just been a busy week," or "It's nothing really, don't worry about it." You're scrambling to close the gap that someone just opened, scrambling to reconstruct the wall they just found a crack in. And there's something heartbreaking about this moment, because part of you, maybe a large part of you, has been wanting this, has been hoping, quietly, desperately, that someone would see through the act, that someone would notice you're not okay, that someone would care enough to ask twice to look closer, to not accept you're fine at face value. You've been carrying this burden alone for so long, and some part of you longs for someone to notice the weight, to see the struggle, to recognize that you need support even though you're not asking for it. But when someone actually does notice, when someone actually sees through the performance, you can't accept it, can't receive it, can't let them in. Because the fear is stronger than the longing, the fear that being seen will lead to consequences you can't control. That person will worry, and their worry will become your responsibility to manage. They'll want to help, and you don't know how to receive help without feeling weak, without feeling like a burden, without feeling like you're failing at being the capable person everyone expects you to be. They'll ask questions and you'll have to answer them, and answering means revealing more, and revealing more means becoming more vulnerable, and more vulnerable feels more dangerous. So you deflect, you rebuild the wall, you shore up the performance, and you watch their face as they decide whether to believe your reassurance or push further. And in that moment, you're silently hoping for two contradictory things simultaneously. You're hoping they'll believe you, accept you're fine, let you return to the safety of your performance. And you're also hoping they won't believe you, that they'll push, that they'll insist on knowing the truth, that they'll refuse to accept your deflection, and will keep asking until you finally let them in. Most of the time, they believe you, they accept your reassurance, they let it go. Because pushing feels uncomfortable, feels intrusive, feels like they might be overstepping, and you've given them an out, you've told them you're fine, so they take you at your word, even though part of them might suspect you're not being fully honest. And you watch them accept your lie, and you feel both relief and disappointment. Relief that you didn't have to be vulnerable. Disappointment that they didn't care enough to push past your defenses. But occasionally, rarely, someone doesn't accept it. Someone keeps asking, someone says, "I don't think you're fine, I think you're struggling and I want to help." And in that moment, you're faced with a choice. Keep deflecting, keep rebuilding the wall, keep them out. Or let yourself be seen, let yourself be known. Let them pass the protection and into the truth. And this choice feels enormous, feels life-altering, feels like everything hinges on what you decide in this moment. And even when the person is safe, even when they've proven themselves trustworthy, even when they're offering genuine care without judgment or agenda, the choice is still difficult. Because letting someone in means things change, means the dynamic shifts, means you're no longer carrying everything alone. And carrying everything alone, exhausting as it is, isolating as it is familiar, is known, is what you've always done. Letting someone help, letting someone support you, letting someone share the weight, that's unfamiliar, unknown, uncertain. And uncertain feels more dangerous than the exhausting familiar, even when the exhausting familiar is slowly breaking you. So even when someone sees you, even when someone offers to hold you in your struggle, you often still can't accept it, can't let them in, can't drop the performance even when someone is explicitly telling you it's safe to drop it. The protection is too strong, the fear is too deep, the pattern is too ingrained, and so you keep the wall up, keep the person out, keep yourself alone. Even when alone is the last thing you actually want to be, there's a moment that comes for most people who maintain this performance long term when something gives way. When the structure of fine finally collapses under its own weight. This doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's private. But it's a moment when you simply cannot perform anymore, cannot say you're fine one more time, cannot hold one more thing, cannot manage one more day of pretending. Your breaking point might come during a crisis, when everything becomes too much too fast. Or it might come during something ordinary, something small that shouldn't be significant, but becomes the thing that finally exhausts your capacity. You might be loading the dishwasher when you start crying and can't stop. You might be in a meeting when you realize you need to leave, right now, immediately, before you fall apart in front of everyone. You might wake up one morning and know, with absolute certainty, that you cannot continue like this, cannot maintain the performance any longer, cannot keep acting fine when everything inside you is breaking. This moment is terrifying. It feels like losing yourself, like everything you've built, all your careful control, all your practiced management is crumbling. But it's also, in a strange way, a beginning, because you can't rebuild differently until the old structure falls apart. The breaking point doesn't announce itself in advance. It doesn't send a warning. There's no notification that says you have 3 more days of holding it together before you completely fall apart. It just happens, usually without warning, usually at a time that feels inconvenient, inappropriate, embarrassing. You've been managing, you've been functioning, you've been maintaining the performance through circumstances that would challenge anyone, and then suddenly, without preparation, without permission, without any ability to control it, everything breaks. And the trigger for this breaking is often absurdly small. Someone asks you a simple question and you burst into tears. The printer jams and you feel rage so intense you have to leave the room. Your partner makes a neutral comment and you completely fall apart. From the outside, your response looks wildly disproportionate. But that's because the outside can't see what's actually happening, can't see the accumulated pressure, can't see the years of holding, containing, performing, can't see that this small trigger isn't the cause of your breakdown. It's just the final straw. The tiny thing that finally exceeded your capacity. The small breach in the dam that allowed everything behind it to come flooding through. And in the moment of breaking, there's terror. Pure terror. Because you're losing control. The thing you've been managing so carefully, so consistently for so long is now managing you. The emotions you've been containing are now expressing themselves without your permission. The struggle you've been hiding is now becoming visible whether you want it to be or not. And this loss of control feels catastrophic. Feels like complete system failure. Feels like you're falling apart in a way you might not be able to come back from. You might try to stop it, try to stuff everything back down, try to regain control, but you can't. The breaking has its own momentum now, its own force, and you're not strong enough to contain it anymore. Your capacity has been exceeded, your resources have been depleted, your ability to hold has reached its absolute limit, and so the breaking continues. The tears keep coming. The shaking doesn't stop. The overwhelming feeling of being unable to cope persists despite your best efforts to make it go away. And if this happens in private, if you're alone when you break, there might be some small mercy in that. You don't have to manage anyone else's reaction. Don't have to explain yourself. Don't have to minimize your breakdown to make others comfortable. You can just let it happen. Let yourself fall completely apart without an audience. But even private breakdowns are terrifying, because you don't know if you'll be able to put yourself back together. Don't know how long this will last. Don't know what comes after the breaking. If it happens in public or in front of people, the terror intensifies. Now you're not just falling apart, you're falling apart in front of witnesses. People are seeing what you've worked so hard to hide, seeing your lack of fineness, seeing your struggle, seeing your humanity in its rawest, most vulnerable form. And you might feel shame about this. Intense shame. Because you've failed to maintain the performance, failed to stay in control, failed to be the fine person everyone expects you to be. You've revealed what you've been protecting, and that revelation feels like failure. But here's what's actually happening in a breaking point. Here's what's actually occurring beneath the terror and the shame and the sense of losing yourself. Your system is finally releasing pressure that's been building for too long. Your psyche is purging what can no longer be contained. Your body is expressing what your words have refused to express. The breaking point is not a failure. It's not weakness. It's not proof that you can't handle life. It's proof that you've been handling too much for too long without support. It's proof that you're human, with human limits, and you've exceeded those limits. It's proof that fine, when it's performance rather than reality, eventually becomes unsustainable. And while the breaking feels like an ending, like everything falling apart, like collapse, it's actually a beginning. Because you can't continue the way you've been continuing. The performance has become too costly. The pretense has become too exhausting. The gap between internal and external has become too wide. Something has to change. And change requires the old structure to break down before a new structure can be built. The breaking point is that breakdown, that necessary collapse of what wasn't working so something different can emerge. You don't know that in the moment, of course. In the moment, it just feels like falling apart, like losing yourself, like everything you've built is crumbling. But later, when you've survived the breaking, when you've come through to the other side, you might be able to see it differently. Might be able to recognize that the breaking point was actually your system trying to save you. Trying to force change that you wouldn't make voluntarily. Trying to release pressure that would have destroyed you if it had continued building. The breaking point isn't the end. It's the moment when your psyche finally said, enough. When your body finally refused to keep performing. When your system finally prioritized truth over appearance. And that, difficult as it is to experience, might be exactly what you needed. Even if it's not at all what you wanted. What would it mean to give yourself permission to not be fine? Not as a permanent state, not as an identity, but as a temporary reality that deserves acknowledgement. To say, out loud, or even just to yourself, I am not fine right now, and that's okay. To stop comparing your struggles to others' struggles and deciding yours don't count. To stop telling yourself you should be grateful and therefore can't struggle. To stop performing strength when you feel weak. To stop pretending to be okay when you're falling apart. This permission doesn't mean falling apart publicly, doesn't mean losing all boundaries or oversharing with everyone. It simply means being honest with yourself about your actual state. Acknowledging your struggle instead of denying it. Treating yourself with the same compassion you'd offer someone else in your situation. And maybe, eventually, letting one safe person know. One person who's earned your trust. One person who can hold your not fineness without trying to fix it, without minimizing it, without making it about themselves. Permission to not be fine is revolutionary when you've spent years pretending otherwise. It's the first crack in the armor, the first breath after holding your breath for too long, the first moment of truth after years of performance. And it's yours to give yourself, anytime, for any reason, without justification or explanation. You're allowed to not be fine, even if you've been fine before, even if others expect you to be fine, even if you don't know what to do with the not fineness once you admit it exists. You're still allowed. Giving yourself permission to not be fine might sound simple, but when you've spent years, maybe decades, operating under the assumption that you must always be fine, this permission feels radical, feels revolutionary, feels like breaking a fundamental rule you've been following your entire life. Because somewhere along the way you internalize the belief that fine is what you owe the world, that fine is your obligation, that fine is the price of being acceptable, being worthy, being allowed to take up space. And so not fine feels like a transgression, feels like failing to pay what you owe. But here's the truth that's hard to accept when you've been performing for so long. You don't owe anyone fineness. You don't owe the world a perpetual state of being okay. You don't owe others your constant capability, your unwavering strength, your reliable fineness. These aren't debts. They're not obligations. They're not what makes you worthy of existence, of love, of care. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to have hard days, difficult seasons, overwhelming circumstances. You're allowed to be human, with all the complexity and struggle that being human entails. And giving yourself this permission starts small, starts private, starts with simply acknowledging to yourself, in the privacy of your own mind, that you're not fine, not saying it to anyone else, not making it public, just privately, internally admitting the truth. I'm not fine right now, Just that. Just the simple acknowledgement. And at first this might feel uncomfortable, might feel wrong, might trigger all the defenses that usually prevent this acknowledgement. Your mind might immediately start arguing. But other people have it worse. I should be grateful. This isn't that big of a deal. All the familiar ways you dismiss your own experience might activate. But if you can sit with the acknowledgement anyway, if you can hold the truth even while your defenses argue against it, something begins to shift. Because acknowledgement, even private acknowledgement, begins to close the gap between internal experience and external expression. You're still not telling anyone else. You're still maintaining the performance externally, but internally, you're being honest. You're giving yourself the validation you've been withholding. You're treating your struggle as real instead of as something to be dismissed or minimized or hidden. And this internal shift, small as it might seem, is significant. It's the beginning of treating yourself with compassion. The beginning of recognizing your own humanity. The beginning of allowing yourself to be something other than fine. And from that private acknowledgement, if you can maintain it, if you can keep being honest with yourself, even when every habit wants you to return to pretense, you might eventually be ready for the next step, which is letting one person know, not everyone, not publicly, just one person, one safe person, one person who's proven, through their actions over time, that they can hold difficulty without making it worse. One person who won't minimize, won't fix, won't make it about themselves. One person who can simply witness your struggle without trying to change it or you. And telling even one person is terrifying. Because it means making your private acknowledgement public. It means someone else will know you're not fine. Someone else will see past the performance. Someone else will witness your struggle. And all your fears about vulnerability, all your worries about being a burden, all your concerns about being seen as weak, they'll activate. But if you can do it anyway, if you can say to this one safe person, I'm not fine, something profound can happen. You can discover that vulnerability doesn't always lead to the consequences you fear. That being honest about struggle doesn't always result in judgment or dismissal or distance. That sometimes, rarely but sometimes, people can hold your not fineness with care, can witness it without trying to fix it, can acknowledge it without making it worse. And permission to not be fine also means permission to not know what to do about it. Because often, one of the things that keeps you locked in performance is the belief that if you admit you're not fine, you should then know how to fix it, should have a plan, should immediately start implementing solutions. But permission to not be fine includes permission to just be not fine for a while, to not know how to fix it, to not have answers, to simply exist in the difficulty without having to immediately resolve it. This is hard for capable people, hard for people who've been the strong one, the one who solves problems, the one who handles things. But sometimes, not fineness doesn't need solving. It needs acknowledging. It needs witnessing. It needs the space to exist without being immediately managed or fixed or resolved. Permission to not be fine is yours to give yourself at any moment. It doesn't require earning. Doesn't require proving your struggle is significant enough. Doesn't require waiting until you're at breaking point. You can give yourself this permission right now, today, this moment. You can say, internally or externally, I am not fine, and I'm allowed to not be fine. And that permission, that simple statement, can be the beginning of something different. The beginning of honesty, the beginning of self-compassion, the beginning of closing the gap between who you are and who you appear to be, the beginning of a living with more truth and less performance. You are allowed. You have always been allowed, and you can claim that permission anytime you're ready. Acting fine when you're not is a pattern, and patterns, even deeply entrenched ones, even ones that have existed for years, can change. Not easily, not quickly, not without discomfort and uncertainty and the vulnerability of trying something different. But change is possible. You can learn to be more honest about your struggles, can practice saying I'm having a hard time instead of I'm fine, can start letting safe people see your not fineness in small, manageable doses, can begin closing the gap between your internal experience and your external presentation. This doesn't mean you'll become someone who falls apart publicly. Doesn't mean you'll lose all the strength and resilience you've developed. It just means you'll add honesty to your strength, authenticity to your resilience, connection to your independence. You'll still be you, just a version of you that doesn't have to perform constantly, that doesn't have to carry everything alone, that can admit struggle without shame, that can ask for support without feeling like a burden. That can be not fine sometimes, and know that not fineness doesn't define you, doesn't diminish you, doesn't make you less than. You are learning. Learning that fine doesn't have to be your default answer. Learning that strength can include vulnerability. Learning that you deserve the same care and compassion you offer others. And that learning that slowly changing pattern is not weakness. It's courage. It's growth. It's the beginning of living more honestly, more wholly, more like yourself. Change doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen through one moment of decision where you suddenly become a different person who operates in a completely different way. Change happens gradually, through small experiments, through tiny risks, through moments where you try something different than what you've always done, and you discover that the consequences you feared don't materialize. Or they do materialize, but you survive them. Or they're uncomfortable but not unbearable. Change happens through accumulation of these small moments where you practice being different. And practicing being different might start with something as simple as pausing before you answer, "How are you?" Instead of the automatic "I'm fine," you pause. You actually check in with yourself. You access your actual state. And maybe you still say "I'm fine" because you're not ready to be honest, because the situation isn't safe, because the habit is too strong. But the pause itself is significant. The pause is you creating space between stimulus and response. The pause is you beginning to bring consciousness to a pattern that's been automatic for years. And consciousness is always the first step toward change. From that pause, eventually, with practice, you might be able to say something more honest. Maybe not fully honest, maybe not. "I'm actually falling apart," but something closer to truth than fine. "I'm having a tough week. I'm a bit overwhelmed. I'm managing, but it's been a lot." These aren't dramatic revelations. They're not falling apart in public. They're just small movements toward honesty, small cracks in the facade of fine. And you might discover, when you offer these small truths, that the world doesn't end, that people don't reject you, that the consequences you feared don't occur, and that discovery, that experience of being slightly more honest and surviving it, that builds capacity, that teaches your nervous system that maybe vulnerability isn't as dangerous as you thought. And change also involves finding people who are safe, because not everyone is safe for your vulnerability. Not everyone can hold your not fineness with care. Some people will minimize, some will fix, some will make it about themselves. And these people, they don't get access to your truth. They don't get to see past the performance. You're not required to be vulnerable with everyone. You're not required to share your struggles with people who've proven they can't hold them well. But there might be one person, maybe two, maybe a few, people who, over time, through their consistent actions, have shown themselves to be safe. And with these people, you can practice being more real, more honest, more yourself. And practicing with safe people might look like this. You share something small, something manageable, a minor struggle, a small difficulty, and you watch how they respond. Do they listen without immediately trying to fix? Do they acknowledge without minimizing? Do they hold what you've shared without making it about themselves? If they do, if the response is good, you might try again. Share something slightly bigger. Still small enough to feel manageable, but a step closer to your actual experience. And you keep testing, keep observing, keep assessing whether this person continues to be safe as you reveal more. And if they are, if they consistently respond with care, then you might eventually share something real, something significant, something that actually matters, and the experience of being seen in your struggle by someone who holds it well, that can be transformative, that can begin to teach you that vulnerability isn't always dangerous, that honesty doesn't always lead to pain, that connection is possible even when you're not fine. Change also means being patient with yourself, being compassionate with the parts of you that resist change, that want to stay in the familiar pattern of performance even though the pattern is exhausting. Those parts aren't being difficult, they're not being stubborn, they're trying to protect you. They learned that performance was necessary for safety, and they're not going to immediately trust that it's safe to stop performing. So change involves working with those protective parts gently, thanking them for how they've kept you safe, acknowledging what they've done for you, and then gradually, carefully helping them learn that maybe the old protection isn't as necessary anymore. Maybe there are people who are actually safe. Maybe vulnerability doesn't always end badly. Maybe you can be not fine sometimes and still be okay. And through all of this gradual change, Through all these small experiments and tiny risks and careful practice, you remain yourself. You don't lose your strength, don't lose your resilience, don't lose your capability. You just add to those qualities. You add honesty, you add authenticity, you add the possibility of connection that includes your struggle rather than requiring you to hide it. You become more whole, more integrated, more fully yourself, not the performed self or the hidden self, but the actual self, the one who is strong and struggles, the one who is capable and sometimes overwhelmed, the one who is fine sometimes and not fine other times, the full, complex human version of you that's been there all along, just waiting for permission to exist without performance. And that version, that authentic version, is who you're becoming, slowly, gradually, through small moments of courage and tiny acts of honesty. You're becoming someone who doesn't have to pretend anymore, someone who can be real, someone who can be themselves. And that becoming, difficult as it is, uncomfortable as it is worth every moment of discomfort. Because living honestly, living authentically, living as your actual self rather than your performed self, that's not just survival, that's living. And you deserve to live fully, honestly, exactly as you are, exactly as